Section 1. The Anatomy of Springfield's Silence. There is a town somewhere in America, or maybe everywhere in America, or maybe nowhere at all, where the streetlights flicker yellow and the nuclear cooling towers breathe steam into the night sky like something slow and sleeping, and nobody looks up at them anymore. They stopped looking up a long time ago. The people who live here have learned, through some mechanism that nobody has ever fully named, to carry on, to make dinner, to sit on the couch, to laugh at the same jokes and argue about the same things and go to bed at the same time every night, in the same houses, on the same streets, beneath the same cracked cooling towers, breathing the same air. The town is called Springfield. You already know it. You have always known it. The Simpsons debuted on December 17th, 1989, and the show has never stopped. 36 seasons, 788 episodes. It is the longest-running American animated series in history, the longest-running sitcom, the longest-running scripted primetime show ever produced. And in all of that time, across every single one of those episodes, not one person in Springfield has aged a single day. Bart Simpson is still 10 years old. He has been 10 years old for longer than most of his current audience has been alive. Lisa is still 8. Maggie is still clutching that pacifier with the quiet gravity of someone who knows exactly what she's doing. Homer still drives to the same nuclear power plant, punches the same clock, and sits down at the same console where the same warning lights blink, amber and red, and nobody ever seems alarmed. Marge still stands at the kitchen counter with her tower of blue hair defying gravity, and the house on Evergreen Terrace still smells, somehow, like pot roast and carpet and something faintly chemical that nobody talks about. This is a show about a family. That much has always been obvious, but the longer you sit with it, the more it starts to feel like the show is about something else too. Something underneath the family, underneath the jokes, underneath the laugh track and the couch gags and the celebrity cameos. Something that hums at a frequency just below what the human ear is supposed to catch, the way a power plant hums if you stand too close to the fence at the right time of night. Tonight, we are going to listen for that hum. We are going to walk through Springfield slowly, the way you might walk through a town you've known your whole life at 3 in the morning, when the lights are low and the streets are empty and there is time to notice the things you never noticed during the day, the three-eyed fish in the river, the skeleton in the basement of the plant, the tiny elderly man who has been dying and returning for 36 years without anyone asking a single question about it, the baby who shot a billionaire and got away with it because no jury would convict someone who hadn't learned to speak yet, the principal who is not who he says he is, the mother who vanished in the night, the town that voted to make the truth illegal. None of this is hidden. That's the part that should bother you most. None of it is buried in small print or concealed in a throwaway scene that blinks past at 24 frames a second. The show puts all of it directly in front of you, sometimes in scenes that run for several minutes, sometimes in dialogue that explains exactly what is happening and why. And then the episode ends, and the next episode begins, and nobody remembers. The town resets. The river is still poisoned, but nobody tests it. The cooling towers are still cracked, but nobody fixes them. The principal is still an imposter, but nobody says his real name aloud. And Springfield carries on, ordinary and yellow and impossible, exactly as it always has. Tonight is going to be gentle. This is not a video designed to agitate you or disturb you or keep you grinding your teeth until 2 in the morning. This is the kind of exploration you do when you are already half comfortable, already sinking into wherever you have settled yourself, and you want something to think about as your breathing slows and the room grows dark. The mysteries of Springfield are the perfect companion for that particular kind of almost sleep, because they are the kind of mysteries that have no clean ending. They don't resolve. They don't snap shut. They unspool slowly and loop back into themselves, and following them is less like solving a puzzle and more like tracing the pattern in a very old piece of wallpaper, finding shapes you hadn't seen before, shapes that were always there, shapes that become more visible the longer you look. So let's look. There is something important about the way Springfield presents itself that becomes more interesting the more time you spend with it. On the surface, it is an absolutely average American town. It has a main street and a mall and a church and a bar called Moe's and a school called Springfield Elementary, where the children are mostly unsupervised and the cafeteria serves food that violates several international agreements. It has a nuclear power plant on the edge of town that has been described in the show's own dialogue as being among the most dangerous industrial facilities ever constructed in any medium, fictional or otherwise. It has a harbor. It has mountains. It has a desert somewhere nearby. It has a gorge and a tire fire and a monorail that was built by a con man and eventually stopped working, though the specifics of what happened to it after that are never entirely clear. Springfield has weather that ranges from snowstorms to tropical heat waves within the span of a single television season, and it borders, depending on which episode you are watching, the states of Ohio, Nevada, Maine, Kentucky, or some combination thereof. It is simultaneously on the coast and in the heartland. The state abbreviation on the license plates has been shown as NT, which is not a real state abbreviation for any state that has ever existed. When Homer once called the state capital, the person who answered described their state only as one that begins with a vowel. This is not carelessness. This is not the writers forgetting what they wrote 3 seasons ago. The show has been deliberately, consistently, systematically evasive about where Springfield is for 36 years, and the evasion is so thorough and so sustained that it has to be intentional. There is a reason the town cannot be found on any map, and we will get into that reason later in the night. For now, just sit with the strangeness of it. A town so famous that more Americans can name it than can name the capital of half the states in the actual country, and yet nobody can tell you where it is. It floats. It shifts. It exists everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Part of what makes Springfield feel so real, despite being impossible, is the texture of it. The show spent its early years building a town that felt inhabited, that felt like it had history and geography, and the kind of small-town institutional memory that accumulates over generations. The Springfield nuclear power plant has been there since before Homer was born. The founding of the town is depicted in flashback episodes, and those flashbacks suggest that Springfield has been struggling with the same fundamental tensions for well over a century. The tension between the powerful and the powerless, between the people who own things and the people who work for the people who own things, between the comfortable lie and the uncomfortable truth. Charles Montgomery Burns has been part of that story for most of it. He is, by the show's own timeline, well over 100 years old. Some episodes place his birth in the 1880s. He has personal memories of events that happened before the First World War. He attended Yale. He served in the Second World War in a capacity the show describes as morally ambiguous at best. He has met presidents and industrial titans and historical figures who have been dead for decades. And he describes all of these encounters in the first person, in the present tense of a man who was there and remembers it clearly. He is also the reason the plant exists, the reason it is so dangerous, the reason it has never been fixed, and the reason Homer Simpson still has a job despite having been responsible for 742 documented workplace violations at last count. Burns is the organizing principle of Springfield's dysfunction. Almost every mystery in this town, when you follow it far enough, has Burns at the center of it. His power plant, his biological weapons laboratory, his grudge against a woman who blew up that laboratory in 1969, his deal with Grandpa Simpson, his weekly radiation treatments that keep him alive when everything else about his biology should have killed him 60 years ago. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Tonight we have time. The night is long and quiet, and Springfield is patient. It has been patient for 36 years. It will wait for you to find your position, to pull whatever you've wrapped around yourself a little tighter, to let your eyes get a little heavy. The cooling towers will still be there when you get comfortable. The three-eyed fish will still be swimming in the river. The skeleton in the basement will still be in the basement. Let's start with the thing that connects everything else. Let's start with the nuclear plant and what it has done. Slowly and invisibly and permanently to every living thing in the radius of its cracked and leaking towers. Because once you understand the radiation theory, really understand it, follow it all the way to where it leads almost everything. Strange about Springfield stops being strange and starts being logical. A terrible, specific kind of logic. The logic of a system that has been working exactly as designed, producing exactly the results it was always going to produce, in a town that has been too damaged to notice. Springfield, at night, looks like a postcard from a version of America that never quite existed. The houses are warm and yellow. The streets are quiet. The plant hums on the edge of town, its cooling towers breathing steam into the dark like something enormous and slow and alive. Nobody looks up at them. They stopped looking up a long time ago. If you are watching this late at night, drop your time and location in the comments. And if mysteries like these are your kind of company in the dark, subscribe. There will be more nights like this one. Number. Section 2. The Nuclear Theory: What the Plant Has Done to Everyone. The Springfield nuclear power plant is described in the show's own canon as a 2-unit pressurized water reactor facility. It was built to provide electrical power to the entire town of Springfield and surrounding areas. It is owned and operated by Charles Montgomery Burns, who has never once in the show's 36-year run expressed anything resembling remorse for what that plant has done to the community around it. A surprise safety inspection, depicted in one of the show's early seasons, found 342 violations. 342. The estimated cost to bring the facility up to minimum safe operating standards was $56 million. Burns refused to spend it. He did not refuse because he couldn't afford it. Burns is a billionaire many times over, and $56 million represents a relatively small fraction of his documented wealth. He refused because addressing the violations would mean acknowledging they existed, and acknowledging they existed would open a door to questions he had spent years ensuring nobody would think to ask. The violations themselves are worth sitting with because they are not the kind of minor regulatory infractions that accumulate in any large industrial facility. They are not paperwork problems or labeling oversights. They are the kind of violations that appear in the documentary films people make about industrial disasters. Radioactive waste being dumped directly into bodies of water. Radioactive waste being dumped near children's playgrounds. Plutonium being used as a paperweight on someone's desk. Cooling towers that were cracked through the structural core and patched with chewing gum, actual chewing gum, pressed into the breach by someone who either didn't understand what they were patching or understood perfectly well and simply didn't care. Luminous rats running through the facility's internal infrastructure, glowing in the dark, thriving in an environment that should have killed them, adapting to conditions that no living creature was ever meant to inhabit. And then there are the skeletons. The show depicts this briefly and without commentary. In the basement of an active nuclear power plant, there are human skeletons. Not animal bones, not prop decorations, not anything that can be explained away by the ambient strangeness of the show's universe. Human skeletons in the basement of a working reactor facility. The episode shows them to you and then moves on, and no character ever returns to ask how those people got there, or why no one has investigated, or what exactly happened in the basement of the Springfield nuclear power plant at some point in its history that left human remains behind. The man responsible for ensuring that none of this happens is Homer Simpson. Homer's official title is Safety Inspector. His job, in plain language, is to prevent the facility from poisoning the town. He is the last institutional barrier between the plant's accumulated violations and the people living in the contamination radius. He is also, by the show's own account, a man with an IQ of 55. He has a crayon lodged in his brain. We will discuss how it got there later, because that question has a very uncomfortable answer, and the crayon has been physically reducing his cognitive function since childhood. He sleeps at his workstation. He eats donuts during meltdown warnings. He once caused a nuclear incident by throwing a donut into the reactor core to observe whether it would grow larger. This is the person standing between Springfield and radioactive catastrophe. He has been standing there, failing at it, for over 3 decades. Now, here is where the theory takes shape. The first visible mutant in Springfield appears in the 2nd season. His name is Blinky, and he is a fish. Specifically, Blinky is a fish pulled from a river near the nuclear power plant, and Blinky has 3 eyes, not 2 eyes, the way fish typically have. 3? The extra eye is positioned above and between the other 2, fully formed, fully functional by all visible indications, a complete additional organ that should not exist in any fish not subjected to extraordinary environmental pressure. Blinky becomes national news within the show's universe. A gubernatorial candidate uses him as Exhibit A in a public argument that Burns is poisoning the local environment. Burns is forced to eat the fish on live television to demonstrate that there is nothing wrong with it. He does so. The town watches. There is a moment where everyone collectively acknowledges that the fish in the river near the nuclear plant has 3 eyes, that something extraordinary has happened to a living creature in the local waterway, that this is evidence of something significant and probably dangerous. And then the episode ends and nobody tests the water. Nobody asks the follow-up question that would seem, to any external observer, to be the most obvious question in the world. If the fish have 3 eyes, what is happening to the people who have been drinking the same water for the same amount of time? The answer has been visible in almost every episode since the 1st season, if you know what to look for. Homer Simpson has a skull shape that does not correspond to any documented human anatomy. His overbite is severe. His eyes bulge in a way that suggests either significant structural abnormality or some kind of thyroid condition operating at a scale that would require medical intervention. He has 4 fingers on each hand, not 5. And this is not an artistic choice limited to Homer. Every Springfield resident has 4 fingers, while visitors and guest characters from outside the town tend to have proportions that more closely resemble standard human anatomy. His body absorbs punishment that would kill a normal human being without lasting consequence. He has been shot. He has been electrocuted. He has fallen off cliffs, been struck by vehicles, survived explosions at close range, been buried, been crushed, been dragged, been burned, been launched into the air by various forms of kinetic force, and walked away from every single instance without permanent injury. His healing rate operates on a timeline that has nothing to do with biology as it is understood outside of Springfield. His pain tolerance is not human. It is something else. Something that the radiation theory would describe as an adaptation, the biological response of a system that has been subjected to extraordinary environmental stress for so long that it has restructured itself accordingly. Marge Simpson displays the same fundamental anatomical characteristics: the bulging eyes, the 4 fingers, the hair that rises straight up into a tower several feet above her head and maintains that shape through every conceivable weather condition, never drooping, never losing its structure, never once behaving like actual human hair. Marge was briefly employed at the Springfield nuclear power plant herself. She was exposed to the facility directly. And all 3 of her children, Bart, Lisa, Maggie, were born after both parents had already been living in Springfield's contaminated environment for years. The children display the same characteristics: the spiky hair that maintains its shape without product, the overbites, the 4 fingers, the yellow skin. The yellow skin deserves special attention, because this is the detail that most clearly distinguishes Springfield residents from everyone else in the show's universe. Every person who lives in Springfield is yellow. Not sallow, not pale, not jaundiced in the way a specific medical condition might produce temporary discoloration. Yellow, solidly and permanently, the distinctive saturated yellow of a crayon or a taxicab. And this yellowness does not appear in characters from outside Springfield. When celebrities appear as themselves in Springfield, when characters visit from other towns, when anyone arrives from the world beyond the contamination radius, they are drawn with different proportions, more natural skin tones, features that more closely approximate standard human anatomy. The standard explanation for this, the one that the show's defenders reach for first, is that it is simply the art style. That's how The Simpsons looks. That's just the aesthetic Matt Groening developed, the simplified cartoon anatomy that became the show's visual signature. But within the internal logic of the show's own universe, within the rules of the world the show has established and maintained across 36 seasons, there is a visible, observable, consistent difference between people who live in Springfield and people who don't. The people inside the contamination zone look like something has happened to their biology. The people outside it look like normal human beings. And the show presents this distinction as simply the way things are, without ever asking why the people who live near the cracked nuclear reactor look different from everyone else in the world. The animals are not exempt. Santa's little helper, the Simpson family greyhound, has the same bulging eyes as his owners. His proportions deviate from standard canine anatomy in the same ways that the human Springfield residents deviate from standard human anatomy. He looks like a dog from Springfield, not a dog from anywhere else. The local wildlife, as depicted in various episodes, shows signs of mutation consistent with the water and air quality you would expect from decades of unaddressed radioactive contamination. And Blinky, the fish, of course, has 3 eyes. The show tells you directly, through Blinky, what radiation does to living organisms in Springfield's environment. It causes visible structural mutation. Additional organs appear. Existing systems are altered. Things grow that should not grow. The show then expects you to believe that this same process has had no effect on the humans living in the same contaminated environment, drinking the same contaminated water, breathing the same contaminated air, for the same amount of time or longer. In the episode called The Springfield Files, Homer encounters what he believes to be an alien in the woods near Springfield. The entire town falls into a panic. FBI agents are dispatched. The episode builds toward a dramatic reveal, And when the reveal comes, the alien is not an alien. It is Mr. Burns. Burns has been undergoing a weekly medical treatment so intensive, so saturated with chemical compounds and controlled radiation exposure, that his body emits a visible green glow in the aftermath of each session. The treatments keep him functional for exactly 7 more days. Without them, he begins to deteriorate immediately. And without the next scheduled treatment, he would die. The regimen is so extreme that in the hours after each session, Burns wanders out of the medical facility in a state of euphoric disorientation, stumbling through the woods surrounding Springfield in a way that, to anyone who happened to encounter him, would suggest a creature from another world. He literally glows in the dark. This is not a metaphor. Burns is so saturated with radiation-managed, controlled, medically administered radiation that his body emits visible light at night. The people of Springfield see this glowing figure in the forest, and their immediate response is not to connect it to the nuclear plant that dominates their skyline. Their first instinct is that it must be an extraterrestrial visitor. Not radiation, not the power plant, an alien from outer space. That is the depth of the collective blind spot that Springfield has developed around its own contamination. The evidence is walking through the woods glowing green, and the town looks up and sees a mystery from beyond the stars. The Simpsons movie takes the radiation theory to its logical conclusion. Springfield's environmental contamination reaches a point of such catastrophic accumulation that the Environmental Protection Agency, not a fictional agency, but the actual United States EPA, operating within the show's universe, determines that the town must be physically sealed under a massive glass dome to prevent its pollution from spreading to the rest of the country. The federal government of the United States looks at Springfield, evaluates everything that has been accumulating there for decades, and concludes that the only viable solution is total containment. The town is not fined. It is not cited. It is not given a remediation timeline. It is enclosed, quarantined, treated as an environmental hazard of sufficient magnitude that separation from the surrounding country is the only responsible option. The people of Springfield are inside the dome when it goes up. Every resident who has been living in the contamination zone, every person who has been drinking that water and breathing that air and living within range of those cracked cooling towers, they are sealed inside with everything they have been absorbing. And the show treats this as an adventure, a problem to be solved, a plot complication that Homer will eventually find a way to resolve so that the family can come home to Evergreen Terrace and the episode can end. Burns understands all of this. The show makes this explicit, not through implication or inference, but through direct depiction across multiple episodes. Burns funds private medical research. He retains personal physicians. He undergoes the weekly treatments that keep him alive through what amounts to a chronic condition of managed radiation poisoning. He has built, within the infrastructure of the plant and his associated enterprises, a pharmaceutical operation capable of synthesizing the compounds his body requires to survive. Burns understands radiation at a level of practical intimacy that no one else in Springfield possesses, because radiation is the thing keeping him alive, and he has spent over a century developing protocols for managing its effects. He also knows what the plant is doing to Springfield. He has always known. The contamination of the local water supply is not accidental or unforeseen. It is the predictable consequence of operating a facility with 342 unaddressed violations, including the direct dumping of radioactive waste into bodies of water. Burns knows what radioactive exposure does to biological systems, because his own body is the most intensely documented case study in Springfield of radioactive exposure and its long-term effects. He knows the mechanisms. He knows the timelines. He knows what happens to living tissue subjected to chronic, low-level radiation exposure over decades. And he has ensured that Homer Simpson remains the safety inspector. This is not negligence. The German investors who briefly purchased the plant in one episode immediately recognized Homer's incompetence and fired him. The first thing they did after taking ownership was assess the cost of bringing the facility up to code, and the estimate nearly bankrupted them. When Burns bought the plant back, he rehired Homer at once. A competent safety inspector would shut that plant down within weeks. Homer ensures the violations continue. The radiation keeps leaking. The water stays contaminated. And Burns maintains his monopoly over Springfield's power supply, its economy, and by extension its entire population. A population, it bears noting, that is too cognitively impaired by decades of radiation exposure to question why their fish have extra eyes, and their children have 4 fingers. The crayon in Homer's brain is not just a physical object. In season 12, a doctor removes it. With the crayon extracted, Homer's IQ rises dramatically. He becomes articulate, perceptive, capable of complex analysis. He sees Springfield clearly for the first time in his adult life. He sees his job for what it actually is. He sees the architecture of his own exploitation, the system that has been built around him and through him and partly out of him, and the clarity of that vision is so unbearable that he chooses to have the crayon put back. He elects to return to the fog. He decides that understanding is worse than not understanding, because what he understands, when he can finally understand, is too heavy to carry. But here is the question the show never pursues. How did a crayon come to be lodged in a child's brain without anyone noticing? Homer went through his entire childhood, his adolescence, his adult life, visiting doctors in Springfield, receiving medical care in Springfield, and not one healthcare professional ever detected a foreign object embedded in his skull. Either the medical establishment in Springfield is operating at a level of incompetence that defies credibility, or someone knew it was there and made a decision not to remove it. And if Burns's influence extends into Springfield's healthcare infrastructure, if the doctors are looking away from what the radiation is doing to their patients' neurology, then the crayon is not just a physical object. It is a symbol the show is using to communicate something it cannot state directly. The people of Springfield have something wrong with their brains, something that keeps them manageable, something that prevents them from looking up at the cooling towers and asking the question that any person in any functional community would eventually ask. Why are we all like this? The radiation theory does not explain one mystery about Springfield. It explains all of them. The yellow skin, the 4 fingers, the physical resilience that allows Homer to survive things that should kill him, the cognitive fog that prevents the town from connecting its own symptoms to their cause, the way catastrophes are forgotten between episodes, the way the fish have extra eyes but nobody tests the water, the way the man who owns the plant glows in the dark but the town decides he must be an alien rather than evidence of what the plant is doing to living tissue. Springfield is a contamination zone. The residents are not eccentric characters in a cartoon. They are symptomatic people in a compromised environment, too damaged to recognize their own damage, and that damage was caused by a man who has always known exactly what he was doing and has never once been held responsible for any of it. The plant does not appear in the background of Springfield as set dressing. It is the reason the show's world looks the way it does. Every yellow face, every 4-fingered hand, every impossible recovery from fatal injury, it all comes back to those cooling towers, breathing steam into the night air, leaking their invisible contamination into the same river that Blinky, the 3-eyed fish, calls home. Springfield keeps the lights on. The plant provides the power, and the power costs exactly what it has always cost, quietly, continuously, in a currency that nobody in Springfield is cognitively equipped to calculate. Number. Section 3. Homer's Coma, the Dream That Never Ended. On April 1st, 1993, the 18th episode of the show's 4th season aired. The episode was called So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. The premise was simple enough for a clip show. Bart plays a series of escalating April Fool's Day pranks on Homer, and in the escalating chaos of the final prank, he takes one of Homer's beer cans to an auto body shop and places it inside an industrial paint shaker. When Homer opens the can later, the explosion is violent enough to put him in the hospital. While Homer is lying in his hospital bed in the aftermath of this explosion, he sees a vending machine across the room. He wants a candy bar. He gets up to retrieve it. The vending machine tips over and crushes him. Homer Simpson flatlines and enters a clinically unconscious state, not a dream sequence, not a cutaway gag, but a documented, medically established coma that lasts for 7 weeks. The episode ends with what appears to be a resolution. Bart sits at Homer's bedside and tearfully confesses that the whole chain of events was his fault, and Homer springs awake and immediately begins strangling him. The family laughs. Homer laughs. The show moves on. But before it moves on, it mentions something. In the final moments of that episode, a doctor informs Homer that he lost 5% of his brain function during the coma. 5%? Gone? Destroyed? Permanently absent? The part of Homer's cognition that occupied that 5% will not recover. It is simply gone. And Homer's response to this news is to laugh, even though he mentions in the same breath that he doesn't quite understand why he's laughing. The family finds this endearing. The show moves on, and here is the theory that a Reddit user named Hard to Pick a Name first articulated, and the internet has been unable to stop discussing ever since. Homer did not wake up. The 7-week coma did not end on the day the episode shows you. The waking moment Bart at the bedside, the strangling, the laughter, the family going home, that is not a recovery. That is the first episode of the dream. Homer Simpson has been unconscious since April of 1993, lying in a hospital bed in Springfield General, his brain slowly deteriorating, generating an increasingly elaborate internal world to substitute for the one he can no longer access. Every episode of The Simpsons that has aired since that date, every storyline, every character arc, every guest appearance, every impossible event is the product of a dreaming brain that is doing its best, with gradually diminishing resources, to sustain the simulation of a life it is no longer living. The evidence for this theory is more substantial than you might expect, and some of it was baked into the show's own structure long before the theory was ever articulated. Before the coma episode, The Simpsons was a grounded show. Not realistic in a strict sense, it was always a cartoon, always willing to stretch credibility for a joke, but the storylines were rooted in recognizable human experience. Homer tries to stop drinking and finds himself unable to. Marge considers the possibility of infidelity and then chooses her family. Lisa develops a crush on a substitute teacher and has to process rejection. Bart struggles with his grades and faces the genuine possibility of being held back a year. These are domestic struggles, family tensions, the kind of situations that real families navigate. The show's comedy came from the particular way the Simpson family navigated them, the specific texture of their dynamic, but the underlying situations were ordinary. After the coma, the show changes. The shift is not gradual. It is abrupt and seismic, and once you have been told to look for it, completely unmistakable. Homer goes to space. Mr. Burns captures the Loch Ness Monster. Homer becomes the leader of a vigilante group. Homer joins a secret society with roots going back centuries. Homer discovers that his mother, whom he believed to be dead, is alive and has been living as a radical fugitive. Homer meets God, twice. The family travels to dozens of countries. Homer holds hundreds of different jobs, some of them for a single episode, some of them apparently in parallel with his position at the plant. Homer befriends an array of celebrities who show up in Springfield with no more explanation than the universe simply arranging for them to be there. The tonal shift is so dramatic that it has been a subject of ongoing debate for 2 decades. The internet argument about when The Simpsons got bad and whether it ever truly did, and if so, exactly when, is one of the longest-running discussions in television fandom. People point to different episodes, different seasons, different specific moments as the hinge point where the show changed. What the coma theory proposes is that the hinge is not a creative decision, but a narrative event. The Simpsons did not get bad at a particular moment. Homer's brain got worse at a particular moment. And as the brain deteriorates, as the coma extends and the neural resources available to generate the simulation diminish, the dream becomes less coherent, less grounded in the ordinary world, more susceptible to wish fulfillment, to escalation, to the kind of reality-bending events that a dreaming mind generates when it has lost sufficient contact with the constraints that tether a conscious mind to the actual world. There is a detail that the theory's proponents return to repeatedly because it is so precise that it feels less like coincidence and more like the show knew exactly what it was setting up. 6 months before the coma episode, in the 4th season premiere, an episode called Homer the Heretic, Homer has a face-to-face conversation with God, an actual direct dialogue with a divine being, depicted literally not as metaphor or as the kind of representational dream sequence that Homer occasionally has. And during that conversation, God tells Homer something specific. God tells Homer that he will eventually learn the meaning of life, but not yet. God says, in so many words, that Homer's time is coming, but that the moment has not yet arrived. 6 months later, Homer is in a coma. The timeline is exact. God told Homer that his time was approaching. The show placed that conversation precisely half a year before the event that the coma theory identifies as the point of departure. And under the logic of the theory, this is not a quirky theological gag. It is a prophecy that the show embedded in its own structure, perhaps deliberately, perhaps as the kind of unconscious narrative coherence that writers sometimes achieve without fully intending it. God was telling Homer that his conscious life was drawing toward a transition point, and 6 months later, the vending machine fell. The aging problem is the single strongest piece of evidence the coma theory offers. Nobody in The Simpsons ages. Bart has been 10 years old for 36 years, Lisa has been 8, Maggie has been 1. Homer and Marge have not gained a wrinkle or a gray hair across more than 3 decades of episodes. Every theory that tries to explain this phenomenon has to work harder than the coma theory does. The radiation theory invokes mutated cellular biology. The cartoon logic explanation says it is simply how animated shows function. These explanations are not wrong, exactly, but they require additional assumptions and additional frameworks. The coma theory's explanation is simple and devastating. Nobody ages because they exist inside the frozen mind of a man who went to sleep in April of 1993 and has not woken up. Of course, Bart is still 10. Homer went under when Bart was 10, and his unconscious brain cannot imagine Bart at any other age because he was not there to see Bart grow. He did not watch Bart turn 11 or 12 or become whatever kind of person Bart would have become. He did not hear Lisa play saxophone at 15 or watch Maggie walk for the first time without holding onto furniture. His reference material ends at the moment the vending machine came down, and the dream can only use the reference material available to it. Marge looks the same because the last time Homer saw her, before the coma began, she looked exactly like that. His memory of her is locked at the moment of the accident, preserved with the complete fidelity that memory sometimes achieves for moments of significant emotional weight. Homer loves Marge with a completeness that the show has depicted consistently across all its seasons, and the mind preserves the things it loves most carefully. She will not age in the dream because aging her would require information that Homer's brain does not have access to. The celebrity appearances make a particular kind of sense under this reading. Homer's coma brain is receiving ambient input continuously from the environment of the hospital room. The television in the room, conversations happening at his bedside, the radio somewhere in the ward. His brain processes these inputs the way a dreaming brain processes external stimuli, absorbing fragments, incorporating them, weaving names and voices and cultural references into the ongoing narrative of the dream. The flood of celebrity guest appearances in later seasons, the sheer implausible density of famous people who end up in Springfield, is not a symptom of the show running out of ideas. It is the natural result of a brain in a long coma, absorbing decades of ambient media and translating every famous voice it hears into a character who appears, briefly, in the world it is generating. The show's own writers have engaged with this theory directly. In the 34th season, a fake deleted scene was deliberately created and leaked. It depicted Homer waking from a long coma to discover that all the outlandish episodes had been a dream. The scene was real. It was produced, animated, voiced. The show's creative team made it, and then they attributed it to hackers. They said it was not real. It was a planted hoax, they said, not genuine content from the show. But they made it. The writers of The Simpsons, who have been creating this show for over 3 decades, took the time to animate a scene in which Homer wakes up from a coma and learns that everything since 1993 was not real. They showed you the thing, and then they told you it was a joke. Al Jean, the show's longtime executive producer, addressed the coma theory directly in a 2015 interview. He said simply that it is not true. He dismissed it as fan speculation. What he did not address, what the interview did not ask him about, and what he did not volunteer, was why nobody ages. He did not explain the tonal shift. He did not explain the God conversation 6 months before the coma. He did not account for the way the show becomes progressively more surreal with each passing season, in exactly the pattern you would predict from a dreaming brain with diminishing resources trying to maintain a complex simulation. He said it was not true, and the conversation moved on. If the coma theory is true and the show has never conclusively disproved it, only denied it, then the emotional meaning of The Simpsons changes completely. It is not a comedy about a bumbling father and his dysfunctional family. It is a love letter. An unconscious man's mind, running out of time and energy, and the biological resources required to generate reality, spending every available cycle on the one thing it cannot bear to lose. His family, Marge, exactly as she was. Bart, still 10, still pulling pranks, still frustrating and endearing in the specific way that 10-year-old Bart was frustrating and endearing the last time Homer's conscious eyes saw him. Lisa, still 8, still playing her saxophone, still fighting for things that matter in a world that does not always respond. Maggie, still small enough to hold. Homer's dream gives him everything he wants because what Homer wants is so uncomplicated. He wants his family. He wants Friday night on the couch in the house on Evergreen Terrace. He wants the beer to be cold and the children to be young and Marge to still be there. He does not want adventure or celebrity or space travel or secret societies. The show provides those things because a dreaming brain escalates, because the resources for generating ordinary reality are harder to maintain than the resources for generating fantasy, and as the brain deteriorates, the fantasy becomes the dominant mode. But underneath all of it, underneath every alien encounter and celebrity cameo and impossible physical recovery, the core of the dream is simple. It is a man in a hospital bed in 1993 who does not want to be alone, who does not want the family to scatter, who does not want to find out what happened to his children while he was gone, or whether Marge waited, or whether the house on Evergreen Terrace still has the same smell. The coma is not a nightmare. It is the only form of heaven that Homer Simpson would recognize. And every time the credits roll and the episode ends and the family resets to their positions on the couch and the world of Springfield continues exactly as it always has, it is not lazy writing or episodic convenience. It is Homer's brain refusing to let the story end. Because if the story ends, the dream ends. And if the dream ends, there is only the hospital room and the beeping monitors and however many years have passed and the question of who, if anyone, is still sitting at the bedside. Number section 4. Who really shot Mr. Burns? Before we discuss the mystery, we should discuss the summer it created. The summer of 1995 was the summer. The Simpsons stopped being a television show and became a national puzzle. Season 6 ended in May of that year with the first part of a 2-episode story called Who Shot Mr. Burns? The episode concluded with Burns collapsing in the town square, a single gunshot wound, his hands falling across the face of the town's sundial in a position that seemed, to those who looked, to indicate something. The ambulance came. The screen went dark. America had to wait through an entire summer to find out what happened. Fox promoted the mystery like a cultural event. America's Most Wanted produced a tie-in special called Springfield's Most Wanted, treating the fictional shooting as an unsolved real crime. The show invited viewers to participate in a national contest. Submit your best theory of who pulled the trigger, and the winner would be animated into a future episode of the show. The contest received thousands upon thousands of entries. According to the DVD commentary for those episodes, not one person in the randomly selected sample of submissions correctly identified the shooter. The prize was awarded to someone chosen at random from the pool. Since that person did not have the right answer, they received a cash payment instead of being animated into the show. The producers noted that exactly one person in the entire viewing public had submitted the correct answer, someone who posted it online on the night of the original broadcast, using a college internet account. By the time the contest concluded, and the producers tried to track this person down, the account no longer existed. They issued an open invitation on the DVD release for that person to come forward. As far as anyone knows, they never did. Think about what that means. The show's creators designed a mystery, told the public it was solvable from the evidence in the first episode, constructed a national promotional campaign around solving it, and when the answer was revealed, essentially no one had figured it out. The clues were either insufficient for the answer they pointed toward, or the answer did not logically follow from the evidence the way the show claimed it did, or both. The answer, of course, was Maggie Simpson, a baby. The show revealed in Part 2, which aired in September of 1995, that Burns had encountered Maggie in the parking lot after the contentious town meeting. He attempted to take her lollipop. His gun, which had already been shown to be missing from his holster earlier in the episode, fell from somewhere during the struggle. Maggie picked it up. The gun discharged. Burns was shot. Case closed. The show committed to it. The writers have defended it. The DVD commentary treats it as settled. Except the case was never really closed, and the more carefully you examine the evidence, the more the official answer starts to look less like a conclusion and more like a decision, a choice made for narrative convenience rather than a verdict that follows from the facts. Let's start with the contest itself. The show told the public that the mystery was solvable from the evidence presented in Part 1. The public tried to solve it. Nobody solved it. The one person who got it right did so on the first night, before the promotional apparatus was fully deployed. before the red herrings had time to work their way into the cultural discussion, and that person vanished before they could be contacted. What does it mean that the mystery was effectively unsolvable by the population it was designed for? Either the clues were genuinely insufficient, or the answer the show settled on was not predetermined by the evidence, but was selected after the fact, and the clues were then interpreted backward to support it. The show's own commentary suggests the latter. The writers have acknowledged that they cycled through multiple possible shooters. Barney Gumble was seriously considered. Smithers was seriously considered seriously enough that a complete alternate ending with Smithers as the shooter was filmed, fully animated, fully voiced, and later screened publicly as part of the show's 138th episode Spectacular. The existence of a fully produced alternate ending means the answer was not settled in advance. The clues in Part 1 were not designed around a predetermined solution. The mystery was reverse engineered. A shooter was eventually chosen, and the evidence was then shaped to fit. Now look at the specific evidence more carefully. Burns's last words before being shot were simply, "Oh, it's you?" Not a cry of alarm, not a threat or a plea. A quiet, almost casual acknowledgement of recognition. The way you greet someone familiar, someone you have seen before, someone who does not constitute a threat in your assessment of them. Burns recognized his shooter. He was not surprised. Does Burns recognize Maggie Simpson? Has he ever interacted with her in any meaningful way prior to this episode? The show does not establish a prior relationship between Burns and Maggie. Burns barely registers the name of Homer Simpson, a man who has worked for him directly for years. The idea that Burns would see an infant in a parking lot and respond with the specific phrasing, "Oh, it's you," phrasing that implies not just recognition, but a pre-existing personal context, does not fit with how Burns has been depicted interacting with the Simpson family at any other point in the show's run. The gun itself raises questions. Burns is shown earlier in the episode with his holster visibly empty. The gun was missing from his person before the shooting. Whoever shot Burns used his own weapon, taken from him at some earlier undepicted moment. This means the shooter was not someone who arrived at the confrontation armed and planning violence. Most of the other suspects at the town meeting were carrying their own weapons. They were angry enough, prepared enough to come with means. The person who shot Burns was someone who wasn't planning it, someone who came to the meeting without a weapon, encountered Burns's gun by chance afterward, and made an impulsive decision. A baby finding a gun on the ground in a parking lot fits that profile. So does a dozen other people who were at the meeting that night. The sundial evidence, the detail the show most heavily emphasizes as the smoking gun of the official solution, is arguably the weakest piece. Burns falls and his hands land on two letters of the sundial, W and S, or, from Burns's perspective, looking upward, M and S. The show reads this as Maggie Simpson. But Burns himself, when he wakes from his coma and tells the police what happened, explicitly states that his hands landing in that position was not intentional. He did not deliberately indicate his attacker through the sundial, he just fell. The central physical clue of the mystery is, by the victim's own testimony, a coincidence. The show knows this, it does not hide it. Burns says directly that the sundial reading was accidental, and the show moves past this admission as though it changes nothing, as though a coincidence that Burns explicitly identifies as such can still function as evidence pointing toward a specific individual. In Season 18, Homer Simpson casually claims, in dialogue spoken directly on camera, that he was the one who shot Burns. He says it lands, nobody investigates, nobody reopens the case. Homer confesses to the attempted murder of the richest man in Springfield, and the show treats it like a throwaway line, moves past it, never returns to it. Either Homer is lying for attention, which is entirely plausible given his character, or the confession is genuine, and the official verdict was wrong, and Homer has been carrying this knowledge for 20 years. One of the most carefully constructed alternate theories focuses on Marge. Marge had every reason to want Burns stopped. He stole the oil well that sat under Springfield Elementary and gutted the school's budget. He injured the family's dog. He blocked out the sun over the entire town, threatening every living thing in the community. And there is a prior episode Marge gets a job in which Burns develops an infatuation with Marge. He is not indifferent to her, the way he is indifferent to Homer. He noticed her. The theory runs like this. Marge shot Burns. Burns recognized her. Oh, it's you, with the specific, quiet recognition of a man who has thought about this particular woman and is not surprised to find her here. And when Burns woke from his coma and the police asked him who pulled the trigger, He protected her. He pointed toward the sundial. He allowed the investigation to go where it would go, knowing it would land on the most legally convenient suspect available, the one who could never be prosecuted because she had not yet learned to speak. Chief Wiggum says it himself, in the show's own dialogue. No jury in the world would convict a baby. Maybe not even in Texas. Maggie was the perfect resolution to a problem that the real shooter needed to disappear. An infant too young to understand the accusation, too young to deny it, and too young to ever face consequences for it. The final shot of part 2 shows Maggie alone in a room after everyone else has left. She looks around carefully, checking to confirm that she is not being observed. Then she moves her pacifier in a motion that mirrors the action of pulling a trigger. The show presents this as confirmation. Maggie did it. Maggie knows she did it. But another reading is possible. A baby who witnessed someone else shoot a man might, in the hours and days afterward, replicate the gesture she saw. Not as confession, but as the kind of imitative behavior that infants engage in constantly, absorbing and replaying things they observe. Maggie checks the room before doing it because she knows, at whatever level her extraordinary cognition operates, that this gesture has a weight to it, that it means something, that the adults around her have been treating it as meaningful. She is careful because she is always careful, not because she is guilty, but because she understands more than anyone gives her credit for. The mystery was never solved, it was closed. And in Springfield, as we will discuss at length later tonight, those are two very different things. Number. Section 5. Mr. Burns and the Architecture of Immortality. Charles Montgomery Burns was born in the late 1800s. The show is not precise about the exact year, and the imprecision is itself suggestive the writers have been careful never to pin down a specific birth date that could be definitively contradicted, while simultaneously establishing through dialogue, flashback, and the testimony of Burns himself that he has personal memories of events that predate the 20th century. He has told stories about events from the 1910s as though he was there. He knew Howard Hughes personally. He attended Yale. He served in the Second World War in a capacity that involved stealing a $1 trillion bill from the United States government and then keeping it hidden for decades. He has referenced the Gilded Age not as something he has read about, but as something he experienced. By the most conservative reading of the show's accumulated timeline, Burns is well over 100 years old. By the most expansive reading, accounting for all the historical references he has made across 36 seasons, he may be approaching 140. And he is not merely surviving, he is operating. He runs a multi-billion-dollar corporation. He manipulates municipal politics with the practiced ease of someone who has been doing it for generations. He orchestrates schemes that require sustained cognitive effort, long-term planning, and a working knowledge of modern finance, modern technology, and modern law. His body is visibly ancient. His physical strength is almost non-existent. There are repeated jokes about his inability to perform basic physical tasks, his bones cracking under the lightest pressure, his skin papery, and his grip feeble. But his mind is razor sharp. Burns is arguably the most strategically intelligent character in Springfield. He plans multiple steps ahead, he anticipates opposition, he has built institutional structures designed to outlast individual threats and to perpetuate his power across generational timescales. He has been doing this successfully for longer than any human being should be capable of sustained strategic thought. The explanation for his survival is right there in the Springfield files. Burns undergoes a weekly medical treatment. The nature of the treatment is described only in general terms. It is intensive. It involves compounds and procedures that go far beyond anything available in standard medicine, and the effects of each session are so extreme that Burns's body emits a visible green glow for hours afterward. The treatment does not cure whatever is wrong with Burns. It does not restore him to any kind of baseline health. It simply extends his functional life for exactly 7 more days, at which point he requires another dose. Miss the treatment by even a short margin, the show implies, and Burns would deteriorate rapidly. The margin for error in maintaining his life is essentially zero. Burns is not surviving through any natural biological process. He is being kept alive through a mechanical schedule of artificial intervention, administered on a precise weekly basis, using compounds and procedures that his wealth has made available to him and that no one else in Springfield could access. His life is maintained the way a complex machine is maintained through regular servicing, through scheduled intervention, through the careful management of systems that would fail catastrophically without attention. The treatment involves radiation. Of course it does. The man who built and operates a nuclear power plant, the man whose facility has been leaking radioactive material into Springfield's environment for decades, is personally dependent on controlled radiation exposure to sustain his own biological function. Burns is not merely profiting from radiation, he is powered by it. His body has been so fundamentally altered by proximity to nuclear material over the course of his extraordinarily long life that it can no longer sustain itself through normal cellular processes. He requires external radiation input the way an ordinary human requires food. Take it away and the system shuts down. This explains something the show has depicted repeatedly and never fully addressed: the condition of Burns's immune system. In one of the most famous scenes in the series' history, Burns visits a doctor who delivers an assessment that is played as comedy but operates under the surface as genuine horror. Burns has every disease known to medical science. Every single one, simultaneously. Tuberculosis, hysterical pregnancy, 3 types of cancer, rickets, gout, bonitis, a disease the show invented specifically for the scene, and dozens more. The doctor explains that these diseases all exist in Burns's body at the same time, and that they exist in a state of perfect equilibrium, each condition blocking every other condition from advancing. He calls it Three Stooges syndrome. Like 3 people trying to fit through a doorway simultaneously, none of them can get through. Burns's diseases are all competing to kill him, and because they are all present at once, none of them can achieve dominance. The doctor's conclusion is that Burns is the sickest human being in the United States, and, simultaneously, for reasons that defy conventional medicine, functionally indestructible. Everything that should kill him is being prevented from doing so by everything else that should kill him. Under the radiation theory, this makes a terrible kind of sense. Burns's weekly treatments are not curing his diseases. They are managing them. The controlled radiation exposure is maintaining the equilibrium, keeping every illness in precise stasis, balanced against every other illness, preventing any single condition from gaining sufficient advantage to kill him. It is not medicine in any recognizable sense. It is nuclear maintenance. Burns's body is a reactor, and his weekly appointments are the equivalent of adjusting the control systems to prevent catastrophic failure. Smithers is essential to this system in a way the show depicts but never explicitly explains. Smithers is not simply a devoted assistant, he manages Burns's schedule. He ensures every weekly treatment happens on time. He monitors Burns's physical condition with an intensity that operates somewhere between professional dedication and something more personal. The show has established, across many episodes, that if Smithers were removed from his position, if he quit, if he was fired, if something prevented him from managing Burns's affairs, Burns would be helpless almost immediately. Not emotionally helpless. Medically helpless. Without Smithers tracking the treatment schedule, Burns would miss a dose. The equilibrium would collapse. Every disease in his body would rush forward simultaneously, and nothing at that point would stop them. Smithers is not keeping Burns alive through loyalty. He is keeping Burns alive through logistical competence, and he knows it. The knowledge that his absence is a death sentence is the foundation on which their entire relationship rests. Smithers is devoted to Burns partly because devotion is his character, and partly because he understands, with complete clarity, what the alternative means. Burns's connection to American history adds a dimension to the immortality question that the show has touched on, but never developed fully. The Burns family, as the show depicts it, is one of the oldest and most continuously powerful lineages in American history. Not merely wealthy, but the kind of wealthy that shapes nations. The kind of wealthy that builds infrastructure and then charges everyone else to use it for generations. The kind of wealthy that exists so far above any mechanism of legal accountability that accountability becomes theoretical, something that applies to other people in other circumstances, but never to the Burns family and never to the institutions they control. The show has depicted Burns personally recounting involvement in events spanning more than a century. He is not recalling family history or ancestral accounts. He was there, he participated, he remembers. And the question the show never asks, but that the immortality theory invites you to ask, is whether Burns is anomalous within his own family's history, or whether the Burns dynasty has always found ways to extend the lifespans of its patriarchs beyond what ordinary biology permits. Before nuclear radiation was available as a tool, before modern medicine existed, before the specific technology that currently maintains Burns's life was developed, what did the Burns family use? The show establishes that the dynasty has been in continuous control of its wealth and power for longer than most American institutions have existed. That kind of continuity does not occur through normal generational succession, through the ordinary passage of inheritance from parent to child. It requires either extraordinary luck sustained across many generations, or extraordinary measures applied repeatedly across centuries. Burns has come closer to dying more often than perhaps any other character in the show. He has been shot, he has been hospitalized more times than the plot ever fully tracks. He has been poisoned, collapsed, abandoned in wilderness, attacked, and threatened with a specificity of bodily harm that most fictional characters never approach. And every single time he comes back. Not through the cartoon resilience that Homer demonstrates. Homer survives things by simply being durable, by absorbing damage and recovering through some poorly specified biological toughness. Burns comes back through infrastructure, through money, through the machinery of accumulated wealth that ensures no matter what happens to his physical form, there is always someone waiting with the resources to put it back together. Homer's immortality is passive. Burns's immortality is engineered. Every dollar Burns has accumulated, every institution he has compromised, every politician he has purchased, every doctor he has retained over the decades, it all converges on a single purpose. Keep the treatments coming. Keep the diseases balanced. Keep the reactor running. Because if Burns dies, if the system that maintains him finally fails, then everything he has built, the plant, the empire, the monopoly over Springfield's power and economy and daily life, would have to face a reckoning. And empires do not willingly face reckonings. The scariest element of the Burns immortality theory is not that he might live forever. It is the closed loop it describes. The town's economy depends on the power plant. The power plant depends on Burns. Burns depends on the treatments. The treatments depend on the infrastructure that his wealth provides. Burns cannot die because dying would collapse the loop, and the loop collapsing would expose what the loop has been doing to Springfield for over a century. Springfield cannot let Burns die, because Springfield cannot survive without the plant that Burns owns and operates. And Burns cannot be separated from the plant, because the plant is the source of the wealth that funds the treatments that keep Burns alive. It is self-sustaining. It is complete. It is a system that has been operating in perfect equilibrium, not unlike the diseases in Burns's body, for longer than most of the people living inside it have been alive. Mr. Burns is the oldest man in Springfield. He may be the oldest man in the country. He is kept alive by weekly radiation treatments, sustained by wealth that predates the nation itself, protected by an employee whose professional devotion doubles as a medical necessity, and surrounded by a population too cognitively affected by the plant's output to wonder why their employer glows after his medical appointments and personally remembers the Spanish-American War. He is not immortal. He is something more specific and more unsettling than immortal. He is too expensive to die. And Springfield will keep paying the cost, invisibly, continuously, for as long as Burns keeps the lights on, which, if the treatment schedule holds, will be indefinitely. Number. Section 6. The Principal and the Pauper. How Springfield Chooses Its Reality. Season 9, Episode 2 of The Simpsons aired on September 28, 1997. It was called The Principal and the Pauper, and it is consistently cited by fans as one of the worst episodes in the show's history, as a betrayal of continuity, as the moment the writers stopped caring about the internal coherence of the world they had built. The backlash to this episode has never fully subsided. 28 years later, people still bring it up when the conversation turns to where the show went wrong. The argument against the episode is straightforward. It takes a character who has been established across 8 seasons, strips away everything that made him interesting and consistent, and replaces him with a retcon so severe that it effectively erases the character who existed before. After this episode, nothing you knew about Principal Skinner can be trusted. His military service, his complicated relationship with his mother, his history with Bart, his particular kind of beleaguered dignity, all of it was built on a fiction, and the episode reveals this without apparent regret. But there is a different way to read what this episode does. Not as a betrayal of the show's world, but as the most honest depiction of how Springfield's world actually functions. The episode doesn't break the show's reality. It shows you the machinery that has always been running underneath it. Here is what happens. Springfield Elementary holds a celebration honoring Principal Seymour Skinner's 20 years of service. During the event, a stranger arrives, a man nobody recognizes. He introduces himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner, the real Seymour Skinner, a decorated Vietnam War veteran who was captured as a prisoner of war and presumed dead. He survived his captivity. He escaped. He came home. And when he arrived in Springfield, he discovered that someone else had been living his life for 2 decades. The man Springfield has known as Principal Skinner is an imposter. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. Before the war, he was a petty criminal from the wrong side of a city the show doesn't name. He was drafted and served in the same unit as the real Skinner. When Skinner was captured and assumed dead, Tamzarian felt responsible. He traveled to Springfield to deliver the news to Skinner's mother, Agnes. Agnes assumed he was her son. She needed him to be her son. And Tamzarian, who had never had a family or an identity worth keeping, did not correct her. He became Seymour Skinner. He lived inside the stolen identity for 20 years, building a career and a relationship with a demanding mother who still called him by the wrong name even on the days she liked him, which were not frequent. And then the real Skinner walked through the school gymnasium door, and the charade collapsed. The town now knows. Everyone in Springfield has definitive knowledge that their principal is a fraud. The actual Seymour Skinner, the real one, the war veteran whose identity was stolen, is standing right there, tangible and documented and unambiguous. Springfield has to decide what to do with this truth. What Springfield decides to do is vote to keep the lie. Judge Snyder issues a legal decree. The imposter is declared, by the authority of the Springfield judicial system, to be the real Seymour Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner, the man whose name and rank in history were appropriated by someone else, is tied to a railroad car and physically removed from Springfield. And the decree carries a specific provision. It is illegal, under penalty of torture, to ever mention the truth again. Let that settle for a moment. A court of law in a functioning American town has made it a criminal offense to speak an accurate historical fact. A community has collectively chosen a comfortable fiction over a documented reality, expelled the evidence of the reality, and made the act of stating what everyone knows to be true a punishable offense. Fans hated this. They found it absurd, irresponsible, a cheap joke played at the expense of a character who deserved better. Harry Shearer, who voices both Skinner and Burns, has publicly expressed his displeasure with the storyline. The episode has appeared on numerous lists of the worst episodes the show has produced. But here is the reading those critics are missing. This episode is the most transparent thing The Simpsons has ever done. For 36 seasons, Springfield has been operating exactly this way, and this episode is the only time the mechanism has been shown to you directly. Usually it happens off-screen, between episodes, in the unacknowledged gap between one story ending and the next beginning. Springfield forgets things. Catastrophes are forgotten. Revelations are unmade. The town resets, and no one ever shows you how the reset works. This episode shows you how it works. It shows you the vote, the decree, the enforcement mechanism. It shows you truth being handcuffed and put on a train. It shows you a community that has decided, collectively and with apparent consensus, that the official narrative is more important than the actual facts. Think about how many events Springfield has experienced that should have permanently altered the town's reality. The town has been destroyed and rebuilt multiple times. It has been sealed under a dome by the federal government. It has survived near-nuclear meltdowns. It has experienced alien encounters and environmental catastrophes, and the literal removal of the sun from the sky. And after every single one of these events, the next episode begins with Springfield as it has always been. Nobody mentions the dome. Nobody references the meltdown. The fish market is still selling fish from the same river that has been contaminated for decades, and nobody raises an eyebrow. Fans call this episodic storytelling. Scholars of the form call it the reset button, a structural feature of animated shows that allows each episode to be its own self-contained unit without the burden of accumulated consequences. This is a real and valid observation. The Simpsons does work this way by design, but the principal and the pauper offers a fourth explanation, one that operates inside the show's own diegetic universe rather than outside it in the realm of production decisions. Springfield resets because the town chooses to reset, collectively, deliberately, through an unspoken social contract that functions exactly like the legal decree in this episode. We will not acknowledge what happened. We will maintain the agreed-upon version of reality. We will treat the established narrative as the truth, and anyone who insists on the actual truth will be removed from the conversation by whatever means are necessary. This is not a cartoon convention. This is a model of community behavior that is entirely recognizable in the real world. Small towns have a particular and well-documented capacity for collective amnesia. Scandals are buried through consensus. Crimes that implicate prominent people are reframed, minimized, forgotten. Uncomfortable facts are collectively reclassified as rumors, as misunderstandings, as the complaints of troublemakers who should have kept their mouths shut. The person who insists on the actual facts, who refuses to accept the sanitized version, gets isolated, gets labeled as difficult, gets, in the most extreme cases, metaphorically tied to a train and sent away. The real Seymour Skinner is that person. He arrived in Springfield with proof that the official narrative was a lie, not a complicated proof, not a speculative argument, but physical, living proof in the form of his own existence. He was there. He had documentation. He was the thing the lie was constructed around. And Springfield looked at him and decided that what he represented was too inconvenient to accommodate. Because if Springfield accommodated the real Skinner, it would have to acknowledge that it had been fooled for 20 years. That the person running its school was not who he claimed to be. That the trust it placed in an institution was based on a fraud. And acknowledging that opens a very particular kind of psychological door, the door behind which all the other things Springfield has agreed not to acknowledge are waiting. If they accept the truth about Skinner, they have to acknowledge the capacity for self-deception that allowed the lie to persist for 20 years. And if they acknowledge that capacity, they have to ask what else it might have allowed to persist. The fish with 3 eyes, the cracked cooling towers, the billionaire who glows after his doctor's appointments, the baby who shot a man, the town's inability to remember, from one week to the next, what happened to it the week before. Springfield votes to keep the lie, because the lie is load-bearing. Remove it, and the whole structure shifts. The real Seymour Skinner is still out there somewhere, still on the train, or off it by now, living wherever the train delivered him. Still, the only person in Springfield's recent history who arrived with an unambiguous truth, presented it clearly, and was criminalized for it. The last honest man in a town that made honesty a punishable offense. And Armin Tamzarian is still in the principal's office at Springfield Elementary, still answering to a name that isn't his, still managing his relationship with Agnes Skinner, still being called by the wrong name on the days she doesn't like him and the right wrong name on the days she does. In a school populated by children who are drinking contaminated water and breathing contaminated air, and will grow up, if they grow up at all, to be exactly the kind of adults Springfield needs them to be. Compliant, forgetful, incurious about the things right in front of them. The principal and the pauper did not break the Simpsons. It diagnosed Springfield. It showed you, with unusual directness, what keeps the town running. The vote, the decree, the train, the silence that follows. The next morning when everyone shows up and nobody mentions it and the school opens as it always has and the fish are still in the river and the cooling towers are still breathing and the loop goes on. Number. Section 7. Maggie Simpson. The quietest dangerous person in Springfield. Maggie Simpson is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. She communicates primarily through the sound her pacifier makes and the quality of her silence, which varies considerably. She cannot walk without falling. She cannot form sentences. By every external measure she applies to herself in public, she is precisely what she appears to be. An infant, helpless, dependent, unremarkable. This is, by all available evidence, a performance. Consider what Maggie Simpson has accomplished across the run of this show, quietly, below the radar of everyone around her, while her family was preoccupied with Homer's disasters and Bart's pranks and Lisa's campaigns for justice in a world that doesn't want it. She shot a billionaire, not accidentally, not reflexively, but in a sequence of events that, however you interpret the specific facts of the Burns shooting, involved her being in possession of a loaded firearm, that firearm discharging, and the wealthiest man in Springfield ending up in a coma. She was identified as the shooter by the victim himself. The legal system closed the case not because the evidence was insufficient, but because the legal system does not have a mechanism for prosecuting infants. She walked away without consequence because consequence requires a framework of accountability that has no apparatus for someone who hasn't yet learned to read. She led a daycare rebellion. In a theatrical short film released in 2012 nominated for an Academy Award, screened in cinemas, not a throwaway web extra, but a genuine artistic production that the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences deemed worthy of recognition. Maggie is placed in a daycare facility called the Ayn Rand School for Tots. The facility is run with authoritarian efficiency. Inside it, a caterpillar is about to become a butterfly. Another baby, a bully named Gerald, who appears in the show as Maggie's recurring infant antagonist, wants to destroy the caterpillar. Maggie decides to protect it. What follows is 7 minutes of a baby outmaneuvering security infrastructure, daycare staff, a hostile peer, and the physical limitations of her own body to accomplish a specific goal she has identified and committed to. She reads the environment. She maps threats and obstacles. She develops a strategy, adapts when the strategy encounters resistance, improvises when improvisation is required, and executes a multi-step plan that involves timing, spatial reasoning, and the ability to predict how other people will behave under specific conditions. She does all of this without speaking a word, without communicating her intentions to anyone, entirely alone, in a facility staffed by adults whose job is to monitor infants, and she remains undetected throughout because the adults are not genuinely monitoring her. They are performing the role of monitoring infants, which is different from actually paying attention to what infants are doing, and Maggie has understood this distinction precisely. The test results are interesting. In various episodes, Maggie's intelligence has been assessed and the results have been described, in the show's own dialogue, as extraordinary, as off the charts, as beyond what the available instruments can measure. The show plays these moments for laughs and moves past them. But the pattern is consistent across episodes spanning multiple seasons. Maggie, when subjected to any kind of formal cognitive assessment, registers as something well beyond what should be possible in a 1-year-old. The family doesn't notice. The family has never noticed. They are too busy with everything else. And Maggie is too quiet, too still, too perfectly performing the role of an infant who simply hasn't developed yet. The silence is the key to everything. Maggie's first word was Daddy. It was spoken once, voiced by Elizabeth Taylor, in a cameo appearance that the show treated as a significant event. It happened, it was acknowledged, and it was never repeated. In the 36 years since, Maggie has made no meaningful progress toward language. She is surrounded by the most verbally active family in Springfield. Homer narrates his own existence. Marge processes everything aloud. Bart provokes continuously. Lisa lectures at every available opportunity, and Maggie sits in the middle of all of this noise, completely still, watching everything with those enormous eyes and the pacifier working slowly in her mouth. The theory that a number of longtime viewers have developed is that this silence is not developmental, it is strategic. Look at what happens to intelligent women in the Simpson family and in Springfield more broadly. Lisa Simpson is brilliant. She has been established as a genius across 36 seasons. With an IQ that dwarfs everyone in her immediate environment and most of the adults in the town. She plays the saxophone with genuine skill. She engages with political and philosophical ideas at a level that her school and community are entirely unprepared to meet. She is, by any reasonable measure, one of the most cognitively gifted people in Springfield. What has this intelligence produced for her? Isolation, mockery, the specific and exhausting experience of being the smartest person in a room that doesn't want to be improved. Lisa speaks up and gets ignored. Lisa challenges authority and gets punished. Lisa tries to make things better and finds that the system is specifically designed to make things better impossible. Because making things better would require acknowledging what's wrong, and Springfield does not acknowledge what's wrong. Maggie has watched this happen. She has been watching it since she was born. She watched her sister fight every day for recognition, for respect, for the basic dignity of being taken seriously. And she watched what the fight produced. Not nothing, exactly, but close to nothing. Not enough to justify the cost. And Maggie, at whatever level her extraordinary cognition operates, drew a conclusion from this observation. Silence is power. Invisibility is armor. The less they notice you, the more you can accomplish. The moment you announce yourself as intelligent, you become a target for everything the town uses to manage its intelligent people. Dismissal, mockery, institutionalization, exile. But the moment before you announce yourself, while you are still being perceived as a helpless infant with a pacifier, you can do almost anything. Nobody monitors you. Nobody anticipates you. Nobody builds defenses against you because nobody knows you're a threat. Every remarkable thing Maggie has ever done has happened in the margins, in the spaces where nobody is paying attention. The daycare rebellion succeeded because adults don't genuinely monitor infants. The Burns shooting went uninvestigated in her direction because who seriously suspects a baby? Every time Maggie has saved her family from a dangerous situation, and she has done it more times than most viewers consciously track it, has been because the threat was not looking at her. She has ensured this by maintaining, with extraordinary consistency, the most effective possible disguise. She is a baby. She is exactly what everyone expects a baby to be: quiet, passive, dependent, pre-verbal. She has been performing this role flawlessly for 36 years, and nobody in Springfield has developed sufficient reason to look past the performance to what is generating it. Now consider the radiation theory in this specific context. If Springfield's contaminated environment produces mutations, and if those mutations affect each person differently based on individual biological variation and the specific patterns of exposure, then Homer and Maggie represent opposite poles of the same process. Homer's mutation reduced his cognitive function to the point of clinical disability. Decades of radiation exposure, combined with the physical presence of a foreign object in his brain, have compressed his intelligence to a fraction of what it might have been. He is the evidence of what the contamination takes away. Maggie is the evidence of what it sometimes gives. Same environmental cause, same contaminated water, same irradiated air, same proximity to the plant's output. But where Homer's brain was diminished, Maggie's was amplified. Where Homer lost the capacity to connect cause and effect, to maintain sustained reasoning, to question the things directly in front of him, Maggie gained a cognitive capacity that no instrument in Springfield can fully measure. She is, under this reading, not simply a remarkable infant. She is a mutation, in the most literal and specific sense, a biological system that has been transformed by its environment into something that was not supposed to exist. Under the coma theory, Maggie's genius takes on a different quality. If Homer is dreaming, if the entire world of Springfield since 1993 is the product of an unconscious mind doing its best to sustain the simulation of a family it cannot reach, then Maggie's intelligence is Homer's deepest wish projected onto the youngest person in his world. He can't know what Maggie has become. He went under when she was an infant, and she will be an infant in the dream for as long as the dream continues. He cannot watch her grow or develop or become whoever she was going to become. So the dream makes her extraordinary in the only dimension available, the dimension of potential. She is brilliant in the dream because Homer needs to believe, somewhere in the deep unconscious architecture of whatever is keeping him alive, that Maggie is going to be okay. That the smallest, most vulnerable member of his family has resources adequate to whatever the world will bring her. Her genius is not a mutation in the dream. It is a father's prayer, expressed in the only language a dreaming brain has available. But in the waking world of Springfield, if there is a waking world of Springfield, the reading is different and considerably darker. Maggie doesn't speak because she has learned that speaking accomplishes nothing in this town. She doesn't reveal what she knows because she has watched what happens to the people who reveal what they know. She watches everything, understands everything, remembers everything, and she waits. For what? The show has never told us. Maggie's endgame is the last completely open mystery in the Simpson family. She is the only character whose future remains genuinely unknown because the show has never committed to what she is capable of. We have seen glimpses. We have seen her shoot a man. We have seen her command a room full of infants as though she were organizing them, directing them toward a collective purpose. We have seen her confirm or deny the significance of things with a single nod that carries more information than most dialogue. We have seen her family trust her judgment implicitly. In the unspoken way, families sometimes defer to the member who seems to understand the room better than anyone else. Maggie Simpson is 1 year old. She cannot walk reliably, she cannot speak, and behind that pacifier, behind those enormous and entirely unblinking eyes, something has been thinking for 36 years. Something has been watching the family and the town and the cooling towers and the yellow sky. Something has been cataloging, assessing, deciding, and when that something finally decides what it is going to do, Springfield will not see it coming. Nobody will. That is exactly how she has planned it. Number. Section 8. The predictions, how a cartoon wrote the future. The list is long and the internet has been adding to it for decades. In the year 2000, the episode Bart to the Future depicted a future in which Lisa Simpson becomes the first female president of the United States. The episode established, casually and without particular emphasis, that her predecessor in the Oval Office was Donald Trump. The episode aired 16 years before Trump won the election of 2016. 16 years. In a 1995 episode, a device appeared on a character's wrist that bore an unmistakable resemblance to what we now call a smartwatch. In a 1994 episode, Homer travels to space with Buzz Aldrin decades before commercial space tourism became a reality pursued by actual billionaires. In a 1998 episode, a Homer-adjacent subplot involved a mathematical equation that appeared to the mathematicians who later examined it to anticipate the mass of the Higgs boson particle, which would not be experimentally confirmed until 2012. In a 1999 episode, Homer proposed a theory about the universe being shaped like a donut, and years later, cosmologists examining radiation distribution patterns concluded that a toroidal universe was not inconsistent with available data. In a 1993 episode called Marge in Chains, a flu virus originating in Asia spreads to Springfield, causing mass panic, shortages, and a frantic search for a cure. The episode aired 27 years before COVID-19. During the chaos of that fictional outbreak, the townspeople accidentally release a swarm of aggressive bees, and in the actual spring of 2020, as the actual pandemic was reshaping the actual world, Asian giant hornets appeared in the Pacific Northwest, earning the tabloid nickname Murder Hornets, and providing an eerie resonance to an episode from nearly 3 decades earlier. In 1996, the episode Homer Palooza featured a joke in which the hip-hop group Cypress Hill accidentally books the London Symphony Orchestra. That specific collaboration, Cypress Hill performing with the London Symphony Orchestra, actually happened in 2024 at the Royal Albert Hall. 28 years between the joke and the event it apparently described. In a 1998 episode, the show depicted what appeared to be a major entertainment conglomerate, acquiring another major entertainment company. The specific companies named were Disney and Fox. The actual acquisition of 21st Century Fox by Disney was completed in 2019. The Simpsons wrote the future, or something that resembles writing the future so closely that the distinction, to anyone scrolling through the accumulated evidence on social media, feels academic. Here is the official explanation from the people who made the show. Al Jean has addressed the prediction phenomenon directly, and his response is blunt. If you throw enough darts, some of them will hit the target. That is, in his framing, the complete explanation. The show has produced nearly 800 episodes across 36 years, each episode containing dozens of jokes, observations, and satirical extrapolations about American culture and society. When you generate that volume of content over that period of time, some of it will align with future events through the operation of simple statistical probability. Bill Oakley, who ran the show during several of its most celebrated seasons, was even more direct. There are very few cases where the show predicted anything. Mostly it is coincidence, because the episodes are old and history repeats itself. Fact-checking organizations have examined the most prominent claimed predictions and found, in most cases, mundane explanations. The show didn't predict a Trump presidency. It observed that Trump had been publicly flirting with a presidential run since the late 1980s and made a joke about the logical extreme of celebrity politics. The show didn't predict the Disney-Fox merger. It observed that media consolidation was an accelerating trend and extrapolated it to an absurd but logical conclusion. The show didn't predict smartwatches. It observed that consumer technology was becoming smaller and more personal and imagined what a wrist-mounted computer might eventually look like. The writing staff has historically been among the most educated in television. Multiple writers have held degrees from Harvard, Yale, and comparable institutions. Many have backgrounds in mathematics, computer science, political theory, economics. These are not people generating random guesses. They are people who spend their professional lives studying American culture with unusual rigor and then extending current trajectories to their comedically extreme conclusions. They are not seeing the future. They are reading the present with more care and precision than most people apply to it, and then pushing it forward a few steps. This explanation handles most of the predictions cleanly, but not quite all of them. Some of the coincidences are specific in ways that the extrapolation argument struggles to accommodate. The Trump episode didn't just suggest that a celebrity might one day run for president. It named Trump specifically, and it depicted him descending a structure in a way that visually echoes the announcement he made in 2015, with the escalator and the crowd and the particular staging of arrival. The Siegfried and Roy episode, which depicted a white tiger attacking one of its performers, didn't just note that wild animals are dangerous. It depicted the specific scenario of a white tiger attacking a specific type of performer, which is almost exactly what happened when Roy Horn was critically injured in 2003. These are not vague trend extrapolations. These are specific details aligned with specific events. And then there is the meta theory, the one that is stranger and more interesting than any simple prediction argument, and that does not require the writers to have any information about the future. The Simpsons doesn't predict the future. The Simpsons shapes it. Not through magic. Not through any mechanism that requires anything beyond cultural influence. The show is one of the most watched, most quoted, most referenced pieces of American media in the history of the medium. It has been running for longer than most of its current audience has been alive. Its jokes have entered the American vocabulary. Its observations have become part of how Americans understand their own culture, their own institutions, their own collective story. When The Simpsons makes a joke about Trump becoming president, that joke enters the cultural bloodstream. Millions of people see it. It circulates. It becomes a reference point, something people bring up at parties and share in group chats and mention when Trump appears in the news. The joke does not predict the event. The joke makes the event feel familiar. It primes the cultural imagination. It takes a future that might otherwise feel shocking or impossible and makes it feel, instead, like an inevitable punchline, something we've already rehearsed, something we've already been to the preview of. And when the punchline arrives, the cultural response is not surprise. It is recognition. We've seen this before. The show already did this. This is not a trivial effect. Culture shapes reality through the expectations it normalizes and the futures it makes imaginable. A joke that the audience can quote makes the reality of the joke, if that reality arrives, feel less like disruption and more like confirmation. The show doesn't forecast the future, it normalizes the future. It takes the trajectories that are already in motion and presents them as accomplished facts, decades before they accomplish themselves. And when they do, the audience experiences the sense of already knowing that gets described, after the fact, as prediction. Springfield doesn't reflect America. America, in certain specific ways, has been shaped by Springfield. The show held up a mirror for 36 years, and the culture stared into it long enough to begin, in small but measurable ways, to resemble what it saw. The corrupt billionaire who escapes all consequences. The incompetent government that fails at everything visible. The population too distracted to notice how thoroughly it is being managed. The endless cycle of catastrophe and reset. The collective amnesia that allows the same mistakes to happen again and again without accountability. Springfield was not a prediction of where America was heading. Springfield was a diagnosis of where America already was. The show wrote it down first, in the language of comedy, in the register of satire, in the specific idiom of a family on a couch watching television in a town that doesn't quite exist. And then we watched the show and found the diagnosis familiar. There is one more layer to the prediction phenomenon that tends to get lost in the excitement over the hits. The show has also made thousands of jokes that didn't come true. Jokes about jetpacks becoming standard transportation, jokes about moon colonies, jokes about political outcomes that went in entirely different directions, jokes about technological developments that never materialized, and cultural shifts that never arrived. Nobody screenshots those. Nobody builds websites documenting The Simpsons' failed predictions. Nobody shares the clips of the things the show got completely wrong. Confirmation bias works in only one direction. The hits are remembered and cataloged and shared. The misses dissolve quietly into the archive without anyone stopping to note that the show's predictive accuracy, viewed in total rather than through the filter of only the things that came true, is considerably more modest than the highlights suggest. When you produce 800 episodes containing thousands of observations about the direction of American culture and then filter all of that content through confirmation bias, remembering only the cases where reality caught up to, the joke you produce a highlight reel that resembles prophecy. But it is not prophecy, it is mathematics. It is the natural result of a very smart, very prolific, very long-running show generating more material than any other show in television history. and then having that material sorted by the most powerful confirmation bias engine ever built. The human need to find meaning in coincidence. The Simpsons didn't predict the future. The Simpsons wrote so many possible futures that some of them were statistically certain to arrive. And the ones that arrived are the only ones anyone can remember. Try telling that to the next person who sends you the screenshot, though. Because even knowing how the trick works, even understanding the mechanics of it, the volume, the extrapolation, the confirmation bias, the cultural feedback loop, it is still impressive to watch. 788 episodes, 36 years, thousands of satirical observations, and enough instances of reality catching up to the joke that even the show's own creators, when asked about specific cases, occasionally pause before answering. Number, Section 9, Mona Simpson and the Conspiracy That Broke 3 Generations. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. That was the established fact, confirmed by Homer's own account of his childhood and by a scene in which Abe Simpson showed his son a grave. Homer mourned. He grew up. He carried the specific weight that comes from losing a parent young, from growing up in the absence of a mother, from not having the kind of maternal relationship that gives a person a baseline sense of being loved without conditions. He carried it in the particular way Homer carries things. Not consciously, not in terms he could articulate, but in the shape of his behavior, the texture of his desperation for approval, the clinginess with which he holds onto Marge, the way he responds to any threat of abandonment with a panic disproportionate to the immediate situation. Homer Simpson's entire personality is a coping mechanism for maternal loss. The need to be liked, the willingness to endure humiliation rather than risk losing what little stability he has, the compulsive warmth that coexists with the compulsive destruction, the way he is simultaneously the person most capable of love in his family and the person least capable of expressing it without breaking something in the process. All of it, the whole complicated architecture of Homer's character, is built on the foundation of a child who believed his mother died and whose father was too distant and too damaged to fill the void she left. And in Season 7, the show revealed that the foundation was a lie. The episode is called Mother Simpson. It is considered by many critics and longtime viewers to be one of the finest episodes in the show's history. The premise begins with comedy. Homer fakes his own death to avoid working on a Saturday, pushes a dummy off a cliff near the plant, and allows the town to believe he's dead, but the episode turns, and where it turns it becomes something else entirely. Marge insists that Homer correct the death record at the Hall of Records. Homer goes, and while he is there, he discovers something that makes the fake death feel suddenly trivial. According to municipal records, his mother is alive. She did not die when Homer was a child. She never died. The grave Abe showed him was not hers. It was the grave of the poet Walt Whitman, whose headstone Abe had apparently been passing off as his wife's burial site for the entirety of Homer's life. Homer finds Mona at a cemetery, visiting what she believes is her son's grave. She has been told Homer died, and the timing of her arrival at the cemetery and Homer's fake death have produced a situation of almost unbearable irony. They have been separated for 27 years. He has changed so completely that she doesn't recognize him at first. When he proves who he is, the reunion that follows is one of the most genuinely emotional scenes the show has ever produced. Not performed emotion, not the melodramatic gesture of a show reaching for feeling it hasn't earned, but something quiet and real. A man and his mother, separated for longer than many marriages last, finding each other beside a headstone that belongs to neither of them. And then Mona explains why she left. She did not die. She did not leave because she stopped loving Homer. She left because staying would have put him and Abe in danger. Because the man who owned the power plant, the man Homer would grow up to work for without ever knowing the connection, had effectively destroyed her life and forced her underground. The story begins in 1969. Mona Simpson was, in that year, a housewife. Married to Abe, living in Springfield, raising a young son named Homer. Ordinary by every visible measure. The world outside Springfield was changing rapidly. The civil rights movement, the protests against the Vietnam War, the counterculture that was reshaping what American life was supposed to mean, and something in all of that reached Mona and changed her. She was radicalized. She joined a group of activists, and the target they identified was a biological weapons laboratory owned by Mr. Burns. Pause here for a moment and let that settle. Burns did not just own a nuclear power plant with 342 safety violations. He owned a facility designed to produce biological weapons. In Springfield, The same town where he had built a nuclear reactor that was already contaminating the local water supply. The same town where families were living and children were growing up and people were going about their lives without any knowledge that the richest man in their community was manufacturing weaponized pathogens down the road. Mona and her group broke into the laboratory and detonated what the show calls an antibiotic bomb, destroying the biological agent stored inside. During the raid, they accidentally cured the asthma of the facility's security guard, who happened to be Clancy Wiggum, the man who would later become Springfield's chief of police. The raid was successful. The weapons were destroyed. But Mona made a mistake in the chaos of the escape. She stopped to help someone who had fallen. That someone was Burns. She helped him up and he saw her face. He identified her. He reported her to the FBI. From that moment, Mona Simpson was a fugitive. She could not go home. She could not contact her family. She could not explain to a small boy named Homer why the person he needed most was gone. She kissed him goodbye while he was sleeping and disappeared into the night, carrying nothing except the knowledge that staying would put her son in more danger than leaving him would. Homer woke up and his mother was gone. Abe told him she was dead. Homer spent the next 3 decades of his life believing he was the kind of son a mother would rather vanish than raise, that there was something wrong with him that made people leave, that the love he needed was never going to be fully available to him because of something fundamental and unfixable in who he was. This belief, this wound, shaped everything. Burns, meanwhile, did not simply identify Mona to the FBI and move on. He pursued her. For decades, he maintained an active grudge against a woman who had destroyed his weapons laboratory, and he used his resources to ensure she could never safely return to her family. When Mona finally comes back to Springfield in the Season 7 episode, Burns recognizes her almost immediately through a cab window, across a distance, after 27 years. He notifies the authorities. The FBI arrives at the Simpson house. Mona has to flee again. Homer has to say goodbye to his mother for the second time, and this time he is old enough to understand why she is leaving and who is responsible. He works for that person. He has worked for that person his entire adult life. He punches in every morning at a facility owned by the man who destroyed his family. And the show depicts this knowledge landing on Homer, with the weight of something that is true and cannot be undone. He understands the connection. He sees it clearly. And then the episode ends, and Homer goes back to work, and nothing changes. Because Homer cannot sustain that kind of understanding. His cognition does not hold connections that complex across the span of his ordinary life. The radiation, the crayon, the 5% of brain function that the coma took, whatever the combination of causes, the effect is the same. Homer sees things clearly in moments of crisis, and loses them again in the hours that follow, like a pattern that surfaces briefly in shallow water and then sinks back below visibility. The conspiracy runs deeper than Burns' personal grudge. In a later season, the show reveals that Burns and Abe Simpson struck a deal. Burns had committed a crime. Abe discovered it. The specifics are kept vague enough that the scene can land without requiring the audience to track a complicated plot history, and, in exchange for Abe's silence, Burns guaranteed Homer a permanent position at the plant, no matter how many mistakes he made, no matter how comprehensively incompetent he demonstrated himself to be, no matter how many times he should have been fired, and the documented violations and errors number in the hundreds, Homer would not be permanently removed from his position. This is presented, in the episode, as Grandpa trying to provide for his son's future through the only lever he had available. A well-meaning bargain, complicated and morally murky but rooted in parental love, and the practical desperation of a man who understood that Homer was going to need structural support to survive in the world. But read it alongside the radiation theory and it becomes something else. Burns needed Homer at the plant not despite Homer's incompetence but because of it. A competent safety inspector would have identified and reported the violations, would have forced remediation or closure, would have done his job, which was the one thing Burns' operation could not afford to have done. Homer's guaranteed employment was not Burns doing Abe a favor. It was Burns ensuring that the one position capable of threatening his operation would always be occupied by someone who posed no threat to it. Burns broke Homer's mother to create a broken Homer who would grow up to be exactly the employee Burns needed. He used Mona's activism as the pretext for a federal pursuit that kept her underground for 27 years, ensuring that Homer would grow up without her, would grow up emotionally stunted and desperate for approval, and constitutionally incapable of the kind of sustained self-advocacy that might lead him to question his employer or his working conditions or the 342 safety violations he was nominally responsible for preventing. And then, through Abe's deal, Burns locked that broken Homer into the one job that his brokenness perfectly served. 3 generations of Simpsons, broken by one man's decision not to let the destruction of his weapons laboratory go unanswered. Mona, forced into exile. Abe, forced into a deal with the person who made the exile necessary. Homer inheriting all of the consequences without being given, until he was middle-aged, any of the context that would allow him to understand them. Mona Simpson died in a later season. Her death scene is quiet and devastating, and played, deliberately, without jokes. Homer sits beside her. He holds her hand. He watches his mother slip away for the last time, in a room without much light, and the show does not cut away or resolve to comedy. It just sits there with Homer and the weight of 27 stolen years. The Simpsons is a comedy. It has always been a comedy. But underneath the comedy, threaded through every layer of the show's structure, there is a story about a family that was systematically dismantled by one man's power and one town's inability to resist it. Mona fought back and lost everything. Abe made the only bargain available to him and kept the secret until keeping secrets became the defining fact of his relationship with his son. Homer inherited the damage and spent his life feeling its weight without knowing its cause. And Burns won. Burns has always won. Because in Springfield, the man who controls the power controls everything downstream of the power, including the people who need it to live. Number. Section 10. Where is Springfield, the town that cannot be found? Springfield is the most famous fictional town in American history. More people can recognize the name and describe the town than can name the capitals of many actual states. It has a nuclear power plant, a main street, a school, a bar, a church, a prison, 2 hospitals, a mountain range, an ocean harbor, a desert somewhere in the vicinity, and a gorge. It has weather capable of everything from Arctic blizzard to tropical heat wave within the span of a single season. It borders, depending on which episode you watch, Ohio, Nevada, Maine, Kentucky, or some combination of these and other states. It is located on the coast. It is also in the heartland. It is also near the Canadian border. It is also within driving distance of Mexico. These statements are all simultaneously true within the show's canon, sourced from different episodes in different seasons, each asserting Springfield's geography with complete confidence, each directly contradicting at least some of the others. The show has been deliberately, consistently, and systematically evasive about where Springfield is for 36 years. Every time a piece of evidence appears that seems to narrow the geographic possibilities, another piece of evidence appears in a later episode that contradicts it entirely. Lisa's area code has been shown to begin with 636, which belongs to Missouri. The state abbreviation on license plates has been depicted as NT, which does not correspond to any real American state. When Homer once called what was established as the state capital, the person who answered described their state as beginning with a vowel, which eliminated about 20 states while leaving dozens of others viable. The show teases answers and snatches them away. It has been doing this for over 3 decades, and the teasing is so consistent and so deliberate that it constitutes a pattern rather than an accident. Matt Groening, the show's creator, appeared to solve the mystery in a 2012 interview with Smithsonian Magazine. He said he named the town after Springfield, Oregon. He grew up near Springfield, Oregon. He chose the name partly because of that personal geography and partly because Springfield is one of the most common city names in America. There are Springfields in more than 30 states, making the choice feel simultaneously specific and universal. For approximately 48 hours, the mystery was settled. Springfield was in Oregon. And then it wasn't. The episodes that aired after the interview continued to place Springfield in geographic contexts inconsistent with Oregon. The writers did not treat Groening's statement as authoritative or binding. The mystery did not close. It reopened the same way it always reopens, with a new episode and a new contradictory detail, and the geographic ambiguity continued as though the interview had never happened. This is not a failure of coordination within the production. It is a choice, maintained across decades, through multiple showrunners and writing staffs and networks. The location of Springfield is not undefined because no one has gotten around to defining it. It is undefined because the show has made keeping it undefined a priority. The surface explanation is the most frequently offered one. Springfield is everywhere. It is every American town, or rather the composite of all American towns, assembled from pieces of every community the show's writers have ever lived in or driven through or watched on television. It has the industrial collapse of the Rust Belt and the suburban sprawl of the Sun Belt and the small-town insularity of New England and the particular cultural blankness of the Midwest that the Midwest does not always appreciate being identified as having. It is designed to feel familiar to viewers regardless of their actual geographic origin. You are supposed to recognize Springfield because it contains something from everywhere, assembled without regard for whether those somethings could plausibly coexist in a single location. This is true, and the show's own creative team has confirmed it. But the theories we have been exploring tonight suggest a second reading, one that operates inside the show's own logic rather than outside it in the territory of production decisions. Under the radiation theory, Springfield's geographic impossibility follows naturally from the impossibility of its biology. If the contamination from the nuclear plant can cause fish to grow a third eye, and humans to have 4 fingers, and a billionaire to glow in the dark, and a baby to demonstrate cognitive abilities that no instrument can measure, if the plant's output can do all of that to living tissue there, it's no particular reason to assume it respects the rules of geography. Maybe the contamination doesn't just affect biological systems. Maybe it affects the physical landscape as well. Maybe decades of unaddressed radioactive output have warped the space around Springfield in ways that compress geographic features, mountains, coastlines, deserts, plains that should be hundreds of miles apart into a single, impossible, bounded region. Under the coma theory, the geography is even simpler to explain. Homer's dreaming brain does not have a precise atlas. It has memories, impressions, the accumulated sensory deposit of everywhere Homer has ever been or driven through or seen on a screen. Mountains from a family vacation, coastlines from a commercial, desert landscape from a road trip or a movie or a show playing in the hospital room. His unconscious mind has assembled Springfield from every landscape he has ever encountered, layering them without regard for geographic logic because the dreaming mind does not operate through geographic logic. It operates through emotional logic, through the logic of what feels like home, not what accurately represents where home is. Springfield feels like America because it is made from Homer's memory of America, which is fragmentary and nonlinear and held together by feeling rather than fact. Under the collective denial, reading the reading, the principle and the pauper makes available. Springfield's geographic indefinability is not incidental. It is functional. You cannot hold anyone accountable for events in a town you cannot locate. You cannot bring federal charges against a nuclear power plant if the state it operates in changes depending on which episode you're watching. You cannot maintain consistent EPA oversight of a facility if the regulatory jurisdiction is perpetually ambiguous. You cannot prosecute anyone for anything if the venue where the crime occurred is legally and geographically undefined. Springfield floats between states because floating is strategically safer than landing. Landing means choosing a jurisdiction. Choosing a jurisdiction means accepting that a specific state's attorney general has authority over what happens inside it. Accepting that authority means opening the possibility that someone with a badge and a map will eventually show up at the plant, look at the cracked cooling towers, test the water in the river, and start asking very specific questions about the three-eyed fish and the skeletons in the basement and the weekly medical treatment that keeps the plant's owner glowing. The town that cannot be found on any map cannot be held responsible for anything that happens in it. The episode Behind the Laughter, the 12th season's mockumentary episode, provides one of the most direct attempts to settle the question. In the original broadcast, the episode identifies the family as being from northern Kentucky. In syndicated reruns, the location was changed to a different state entirely. The answer to Springfield's location literally depends on which version of the episode you are watching. Even the episode that appears to provide a definitive answer provides 2 different definitive answers, depending on the distribution format. This is, as a production decision, extraordinary. Someone made a deliberate choice to change the stated location between the original broadcast and the syndicated version. The answer was made to be unstable. The definitive resolution was engineered to be not definitive. Every state in America has been proposed by someone as Springfield's home. Every theory has evidence supporting it and evidence that directly contradicts it. And the show continues, as it always has, adding new evidence on both sides without ever tipping the balance toward resolution. Springfield will not be located, not because no one has tried hard enough, not because the evidence is insufficient, but because the show has made a 36-year commitment to the position that the town is more useful as a mystery than as an answer. A town that could be anywhere belongs to everyone. A town that belongs to everyone cannot be shut down, relocated, regulated into compliance, or expunged from the cultural landscape. Springfield exists everywhere and nowhere. In the space between the states, in the gap between the episodes, in the particular kind of nowhere that a dreaming man creates when he is trying to imagine home and doesn't have a precise enough map to pin it down. Number. Section 11. The floating timeline. Why nobody is allowed to age. Bart Simpson was 10 years old on December 17, 1989, the night the show debuted. He is 10 years old right now, as you are watching this, in whatever hour of the night or morning you find yourself. 36 years have passed in the world outside Springfield. 0 years have passed inside it. Lisa was 8 when the show began and is 8 now. Maggie was 1 and is 1. Homer and Marge were in their mid-30s and have not gained a wrinkle or a gray hair or a line around the eyes across 3.5 decades of episodes. The characters are locked at the ages they were in 1989, and the world moves around them. The technology changes, the cultural references update, the celebrity cameos rotate through different generations of fame, while the people themselves remain entirely, impossibly still. The industry term for this is a floating timeline. It means the show's present is always the viewer's present. When the episode airs in the current year, the characters are living in the current year. When it aired in 1995, they were living in 1995. The calendar changes, the decade changes, the century changes, but the ages don't. It is the standard approach for long-running animated series, and for most of those series, it works without generating the kind of accumulated tension that it has created for The Simpsons. The problem is that The Simpsons has been running long enough for the floating timeline to produce contradictions of genuinely dizzying magnitude. The most visible of these concerns Homer and Marge's shared backstory. When the show began, their history was set in the 1970s and early 1980s. They met in high school. They fell in love. Homer had a particular kind of 1970s teenage experience. The music, the fashion, the cultural context of that specific event. Marge had the early 80s counterpart. Their origin story was anchored to a time period that made complete sense for parents in their mid-30s in the late 1980s. But as the floating timeline dragged the present forward, the backstory had to move with it. If Homer and Marge are still in their mid-30s in the current year, they cannot have met in 1978. They would have been born in the 1980s and met in the early 2000s. Their high school experience was not shaped by Watergate and disco, but by the internet and early social media. The show has handled this by quietly rewriting the backstory multiple times. In later flashback episodes, Homer and Marge's youth has been placed in the 1990s, then the 2000s, then given references consistent with the early 2010s. Their origin story has been told at least 4 times in significantly different forms, each version maintaining the emotional core they met, they fell in love, everything else followed while updating the era-specific details to maintain the illusion of their current ages. Their history is not a fixed thing. It is a draft that gets rewritten every few years. Their memories of their own past do not correspond to a stable set of events that happened in a particular sequence at a particular time. What they remember depends on when the episode was made and what the episode needed them to remember. Under the theories we have been exploring, this is not simply a production convenience. It is evidence. The coma theory has the most elegant explanation. Homer and Marge's backstory keeps changing because it exists inside a dreaming mind that is doing its best to maintain coherence across decades without the actual memories necessary to do so precisely. Homer went under in April of 1993. His brain has whatever reference material it had accumulated by that date. For the world before 1993, it has actual memories. For everything after, it is working with fragments, ambient inputs, the kind of partial information a coma patient absorbs from the environment of a hospital room over years and decades. The backstory shifts because the dreaming brain, when it needs to reference the past, is working from incomplete and progressively degrading records. The story that gets told is the best available approximation of what the records suggest, and the records keep changing as more ambient information accumulates. The radiation theory offers a different angle. The cognitive damage from decades of contamination has compromised not only the town's capacity for critical analysis, but its relationship with memory itself. The people of Springfield do not have stable memories because their memory function has been impaired by the same exposure that has impaired everything else about their cognition. Their histories shift because their ability to maintain fixed reference points for the past has been eroded by the same process that erodes everything else in a contaminated nervous system. The collective denial theory is the most structurally interesting. The backstory keeps changing because the town's social contract requires it to change. The agreed-upon version of reality is not just about current events, it extends backward into the past. The official narrative of how things came to be is subject to the same maintenance as the official narrative of what is happening now. When the timeline demands that Homer and Marge have been high school sweethearts in the 90s rather than the 70s, the town's memory adjusts accordingly, because the alternative acknowledging that the backstory doesn't fit the current timeline would open questions about what else doesn't fit, what else has been quietly adjusted, what other facts about Springfield's official history have been revised to serve the convenience of the people who benefit from the revision. The show has imagined its characters aging. It has done so in several episodes, and when it does, the results are specific and emotionally coherent. In the season 6 episode Lisa's Wedding, the show presents a flash forward to a future in which Lisa is 23 years old and engaged to be married. The future it depicts is detailed enough to be convincing. Lisa has become the kind of person the show has always implied she would become: intelligent and principled, and searching for connection in a world that doesn't quite understand her. Bart has become a particular kind of Bart-shaped adult. Homer and Marge are older, rounder, still themselves. The episode proves that the show can imagine its characters with ages other than the ones they have always had. It can envision their futures. It can tell emotionally resonant stories about who they would become if time were permitted to pass. And then the episode ends. Lisa is 8 again. The future closes like a door. The flash forward is acknowledged as a vision, a glimpse through a window that immediately closes, and the permanent present resumes as though the glimpse had not occurred. The show can imagine growth. It chooses not to allow it. This is the thesis statement of the floating timeline, and it operates on a level beyond the production requirements of an animated series. The Simpsons are the American family. They have been the American family, not just a fictional family, but the representative American family, the household against which American domestic life has been measured and satirized and recognized for longer than any comparable fiction in the medium's history. And the American family, as The Simpsons presents it, cannot be permitted to change. Homer must be middle-aged. Marge must be patient and capable and quietly holding everything together. Bart must be 10 and rebellious and fundamentally redeemable. Lisa must be 8 and brilliant and losing the fight she insists on fighting anyway. Maggie must be silent and 1-year-old and waiting for something nobody can quite name. The dynamic must be preserved. The structure must hold. Because the moment the Simpson family begins to age, the moment Bart turns 11 and Lisa turns 9 and Maggie says something, the show becomes a different thing. It becomes the story of a family running out of time. Children growing up, parents growing old. The house on Evergreen Terrace gradually becoming too large and too quiet as the people who filled it move outward into the world. That is not the show America wants. America wants the version where the couch gag plays and Homer comes through the door, and the family assembles in the living room and everything is in its place. The version where Friday Night in Springfield always looks like Friday Night in Springfield. The version where you can sit down and be there again, in that house, with those people, and nothing has been lost. The floating timeline is not a narrative device. It is a psychological need, externalized into a television show and maintained there for 36 years by the collective willingness of millions of viewers to keep watching, keep subscribing, keep telling themselves that this time they'll catch up on the newer seasons. We built the loop. We maintain it. Every time we watch, every time we laugh at a joke from an episode that aired before most of us were born, we tighten it a little further. We make it a little harder for Bart to turn 11. We make it a little more impossible for Lisa to grow up and leave. We keep them in place because we need them in place. Because the alternative, a Springfield in which time passes and children become adults and parents become elderly, and eventually the house on Evergreen Terrace is just a house where some other family lives, is a Springfield. that acknowledges what 36 years actually means. If the simulation crashes, if the timeline stops floating and starts landing, then Bart is 46 years old and Lisa is 44, and Maggie would be in her mid-30s, and Homer and Marge would be approaching 80. And somewhere in a hospital in Springfield, a man has been in a coma since April of 1993, and outside the hospital, the cooling towers are still there, and the river is still contaminated, and nobody ever figured out how to fix any of it. That's the truth the floating timeline protects us from. The timeline floats because landing means reckoning with what the years have produced. Number, Section 12. Hans Moleman, Ned Flanders, and the Final Reckoning. His name is Hans Moleman, and he is 31 years old. He says so himself, in the show's own dialogue, with an apparent sincerity that the show provides no particular reason to doubt. He is 31 years old, and he looks like this. Tiny, stooped, nearly blind behind enormous glasses, moving through the world with the bearing of a man who has been ancient for as long as he can remember. He appears in the background of Springfield's public spaces, the DMV, the sidewalks, the crowd scenes at public events, and he exists primarily to suffer. Hans Moleman gets hit by cars. He gets crushed by objects dropped from heights. He gets buried alive on multiple occasions and returned to the surface without explanation. He gets eaten by animals whose presence in that particular context raises its own set of questions. He gets struck by lightning, incinerated, launched into the air, driven over, and subjected to a variety of other physical catastrophes that constitute, collectively, a body count that no single character in the history of American animation has accumulated more efficiently. And then he shows up in the next episode completely fine. No explanation, no resurrection scene, no acknowledgement that he was definitively dead 2 episodes ago. He is simply there again, waiting to be killed again, in an apparently infinite cycle of death and return that the show has been running in the background for 3 decades without anyone in Springfield pausing to ask what is happening. He is 31 years old and he looks 90. Something aged him. Something took a man who should be in the early portion of his adult life and compressed decades of physical deterioration into a timeline that produces a 31-year-old who moves and looks and navigates the world like someone in the final years of a very long life. The radiation theory has an answer for this. Moleman's exposure to Springfield's contaminated environment has been not just chronic, but catastrophic. An individual with particular biological susceptibility to the specific compounds the plant has been releasing. Someone whose cellular aging process has been dramatically accelerated by whatever particular combination of factors Springfield's contamination represents. And at the same time, that same contamination has made him nearly unkillable. He dies and returns. He sustains fatal trauma and recovers. His body ceases to function and then reconstitutes itself, apparently between episodes, where Homer's radiation-modified biology gives him extraordinary resilience to damage he endures, things that would kill a normal person. Moleman's modification appears to take this further. He does not merely endure, he actually dies, and then death releases him in a way that it releases no one else in Springfield and he comes back. He is the most extreme case in the town's catalog of radiation-modified biology. He aged faster than any human being should be able to age. He dies more frequently than any character in the history of the show. And he keeps coming back, and the town keeps not noticing, because Springfield has an extraordinary capacity for not noticing. The three-eyed fish, the glowing employer, the baby who shot someone, the principal who isn't who he says he is, the tiny old man who keeps dying and appearing at the next public event with no particular explanation. The town looks at all of these things and decides, collectively and continuously, that they are simply the way things are in Springfield. This is what normal looks like here. The fish are fine, the plant is fine, the principal's name situation is settled by law, and Hans Moleman will be at the DMV next week, ready for whatever comes next. The coma theory's reading of Moleman is appropriately bleak. He is a background process in Homer's dream, a minor character that Homer's unconscious mind maintains with less than full fidelity. When the simulation needs Moleman in a scene, it generates him. When it doesn't need him, it doesn't maintain him. His deaths are the system letting a minor process lapse. His returns are the system reinstantiating him when the next scene requires a crowd. He is not a person in this reading. He is set dressing that occasionally fails and then gets replaced. And then there is Ned Flanders. Ned Flanders is, by every conventional measure, a better person than Homer Simpson. He is kind without apparent effort. He is generous with his time and resources to a degree that strikes most Springfield residents as excessive. He is devoutly religious in the genuine, consistent, structurally meaningful way, not as performance or social signaling, but as the organizing framework of his entire existence. He is physically fit, financially responsible, an attentive and loving father to his 2 boys. He volunteers. He helps his neighbors. He extends patience and grace to people who, by any objective accounting, do not deserve it. He has lived next door to Homer Simpson for 36 years. Homer has borrowed and not returned his tools, his time, his food, his goodwill, and on at least one occasion directly caused the death of Ned's wife. Maud Flanders died because Homer was at the Springfield Speedway dodging promotional t-shirts being fired from a cannon, and the shirts he dodged hit Maud instead, and she fell from the bleachers. Homer's instinct for self-preservation killed Ned's wife, and Ned forgave him. Because Ned forgives. It is what Ned does. It is apparently what Ned cannot help doing. An episode in which Ned's house is destroyed by a hurricane and then rebuilt so badly by the community that it collapses reveals something that reframes everything. Ned has a complete psychological breakdown. He screams at the town. He says things he has been holding inside for what the show implies is his entire adult life. Things about the patience that was always costing him something. The forgiveness that was always a kind of expenditure. The grace that was always being offered by a person who was burning reserves he could not replenish. The town's response is to institutionalize him, to send him to a mental health facility where the staff can address whatever has gone wrong. And what has gone wrong, the show reveals, is that it was never not wrong. Ned was not born the person he appears to be. Ned was a violent, uncontrollable child, aggressive, impulsive, unable to regulate his responses to frustration in any socially acceptable way. His parents, being adherents of a philosophy that rejected traditional discipline, took him to a psychiatrist who spent years conditioning the aggression out of him. The conditioning involved techniques that, described plainly, sound considerably less therapeutic than the word conditioning implies. The result, across years of intensive behavioral modification applied to a child, was the Ned Flanders of the show's present, a man who cannot express anger because his nervous system was rewired, in childhood, to suppress it at any cost. Everything Ned is as a person is a modification applied to the person he was born to be. His patience is not a character trait. It is a cage built around a feral child by a psychiatrist who believed, perhaps sincerely, that he was doing the child a service. His faith is not spiritual conviction, exactly or not only that. It is the external framework a man reaches for when the internal framework has been deliberately dismantled and replaced with something designed by someone else. He needs God to make sense of why he keeps suffering despite doing everything right, because the alternative, the possibility that goodness is not rewarded in Springfield, is too destabilizing for a man whose entire psychological architecture depends on believing that the framework holds. His forgiveness of Homer after Maud's death is the moment the show asks you to look at most carefully, because that forgiveness is not saintly, it is physiological. Ned cannot access the rage that forgiveness is supposed to be displacing, because the rage was conditioned away decades before Maud fell from the bleachers. When Ned forgives Homer for that, he is not performing an act of spiritual generosity. He is doing the only thing his nervous system allows him to do. He is responding with the programmed response of a man who was made, in childhood, to be incapable of the alternative. And this, the show suggests quietly across multiple episodes, is the foundation of everything about Ned. Not spiritual strength, not unusual character, a cage. A well-intentioned, psychologically constructed cage that has kept the thing inside it from ever getting out, and that has also kept everything warm and good, that a person might naturally develop the kind of warmth that comes from freely choosing to be generous, the kind of faith that comes from genuinely wrestling with doubt from having room to grow. There is a detail the show has maintained consistently across all 36 seasons, and it is the detail that completes Ned's portrait as the saddest character in Springfield. God talks to Homer. Not once, not as an anomaly, but repeatedly and literally in face-to-face conversations of the kind that most of the world's faithful spend their entire lives hoping for and rarely receive. Homer has spoken with a divine being on multiple occasions. The conversations have been depicted with the visual and narrative specificity of events that actually happened within the show's universe, not as metaphor or dream or representation. And God has never spoken to Ned. Ned, who goes to church every Sunday with genuine conviction, who prays with the seriousness of someone who believes prayer connects him to something real, who has organized his entire life around a faith that the show's own continuity confirms is not misplaced. God exists in this universe, demonstrably, and has spoken to Homer Simpson. This man has never once received direct, divine communication. He prays. He waits. He keeps coming back. The answer is silence. The drunk falls asleep in church and gets to talk to God directly. The devout man who has dedicated his existence to that relationship gets nothing. This is not random cruelty in the show's writing. It is a statement. The Simpsons is telling you something specific about how Springfield operates, about how the system that governs this universe distributes its rewards. The system doesn't care about moral behavior. It doesn't reward goodness or faith or consistency or the kind of patient, costly generosity that Ned has been practicing for 36 years. It cares about compliance. And both Homer and Ned are compliant. Homer by incapacity, Ned by conditioning, but Homer's compliance is the kind that gets you the interesting experiences. Ned's compliance is the kind that gets you the silence. Homer Simpson is what happens when you do everything wrong in a system that doesn't punish wrongness. Ned Flanders is what happens when you do everything right in a system that doesn't reward rightness. They have lived next door to each other for 36 years, and the gap between them, the gap between the man who tries and the man who doesn't, between the man who suffers for his goodness and the man who thrives despite his failures, has never once closed. Because Springfield is not designed to close that gap. Springfield is designed to maintain it, to keep the good neighbor suffering quietly on one side of the fence and the bad neighbor laughing on the other, and to keep the fence standing between them forever. And here is where everything we have discussed tonight converges. The radiation theory, the coma theory, the collective denial theory, the Burns immortality theory, the prediction theory, the Mona conspiracy, the geographic impossibility, the floating timeline, all of these theories are different. They use different evidence, approach through different angles, make different assumptions about what kind of show The Simpsons ultimately is. Some of them contradict each other at the edges. Some of them fit together so naturally that reading them in sequence produces something that feels less like separate theories and more like different names for the same thing. But every one of them arrives at the same place. Something is wrong in Springfield. Something fundamental and structural and persistent. Something that goes deeper than the animation style or the episodic format or the conventions of the genre. Something has broken the normal rules of reality for everyone who lives inside the contamination radius, or inside the dream, or inside the social contract that makes the lie worth maintaining. And the show has been telling you about it for 36 years. Not through dramatic revelation, not through the kind of narrative moment that a conventional story would use to make its thesis explicit, through accumulation. Through the slow, patient layering of detail upon detail upon detail until the picture becomes unavoidable for anyone who keeps looking. The Simpsons is not hiding its mysteries. It is showing them to you, every Sunday night, in every episode, through every recurring joke and every reset and every episode where something world-altering happens and then disappears without trace by the following week. The show has never hidden what it is. It has just waited for someone to look at it directly, without the protective buffer of it's just a cartoon, without the comfortable assumption that the yellow skin and the four fingers and the three-eyed fish are aesthetic choices rather than information. Lisa Simpson is 8 years old. She is brilliant and she is alone, and she keeps asking questions that nobody in Springfield wants answered. She is the only character in the show who has maintained across 36 seasons a consistent refusal to accept the surface. She argues with the official version. She insists on the evidence. She stands in the middle of Springfield's agreed-upon reality and says, clearly, that the thing everyone has decided to call normal is not normal, and that the question everyone has decided not to ask is the most important question anyone could ask. The town responds by making sure she knows how little any of that matters, by giving her sister the silence that works and giving her the idealism that doesn't. By letting Homer talk to God and letting Ned receive silence, and letting the fish keep growing their third eyes, and letting the cooling towers keep leaking, and letting the billionaire keep glowing, and letting the town keep voting for, whichever version of reality is most comfortable to live with. And through all of it, the family sits on the couch, the opening credits play, The couch gag happens and the family lands in their positions and Homer says his thing and the theme music does what it always does, and Springfield is exactly as it was at the beginning of the episode and will be at the beginning of the family. Next one. We can't let them go. Maybe because they are us. Maybe because Springfield is our town in the way that only places that could be everywhere can be anyone's town specifically. Maybe because Homer is our father in the way that all deeply flawed and deeply loving fathers belong to something larger than any individual family. Maybe because Marge is holding everything together in the way that someone always has to hold everything together, and the act of watching her do it is both comfort and recognition. Maybe because Bart is who we wanted to be when we were 10, funny and free and untouchable, able to absorb whatever the world threw at him and walk away still standing. Maybe because Lisa is who we should have been, braver, more consistent, more willing to pay the cost of saying true things out loud. Maybe because Maggie is the version of ourselves we never let anyone see. Watching everything, understanding more than we say, waiting, behind the pacifier or its equivalent, for the moment when it is safe to speak, or deciding, the way Maggie has decided, that the moment never comes, and the waiting is its own kind of power. Or maybe it is simpler than all of that. Maybe we cannot let them go, because letting them go means admitting that 36 years have passed, that we are older now than Homer was when the show began, that the couch we sat on as children watching the opening credits is somewhere we can't go back to, that the world has changed in ways that cannot be undone. That time has passed, continuously and without pause. While the Simpson family remained frozen on Evergreen Terrace in an eternal Sunday evening, the beer always cold, the children always young, the house always the same. As long as The Simpsons is on, none of that has to be fully true. The loop keeps floating. Bart keeps being 10. The cooling towers keep breathing steam. The river runs yellow in the light from the plant. And somewhere in Springfield General, in a room that the dream has been running since April of 1993, a man lies very still and dreams his family into being, episode after episode, season after season, refusing to let the story end. Because if the story ends, the dream ends. And if the dream ends, there is only the hospital room, and however many years have passed and whatever is waiting to be faced when you finally open your eyes. So the story continues. Springfield continues. The family continues. Frozen and yellow and four-fingered and beloved, in the town that cannot be located, beneath the towers that will never be fixed, in the loop that we built and maintain and cannot bring ourselves to break. Springfield will be there when you wake up. It always has been. That's the whole point. End of script. Total planned word count. Approximately 50,000 words across 12 sections of 4,500 words each. Before we leave Springfield for the night, there are threads worth pulling that don't fit neatly into any of the major theories but that accumulate into something when you hold them together. These are the smaller mysteries, the details that the show drops and never retrieves, the background elements that flicker past in the middle of episodes that are about other things entirely. They are the kind of details that reward the particular attentiveness that late nights make available, the kind that you miss in the daytime because you are focused on the plot and the jokes and the surface of what the episode is trying to do, but that surface in the slower, more receptive state of almost sleep as something you hadn't noticed before. The first thing worth noting is the peculiar relationship that Springfield has with memory and evidence. Not the collective amnesia that we have discussed in relation to the Principal and the Popper episode, the deliberate institutional forgetting of things that are inconvenient for the official narrative. Something more specific than that, the show has established, through dozens of small moments across its run, that the physical evidence of Springfield's history is remarkably unstable. Things that should leave permanent marks don't. Places that were destroyed are rebuilt without comment. Injuries that should have consequences don't. The physical world of Springfield behaves less like a place with a continuous material history and more like a place that is reset, periodically and without explanation, to a state that serves the requirements of the current story. This is partly a consequence of episodic television production, and partly a deliberate stylistic choice, and partly something that the theories we have been discussing assign different meanings to. Under the coma reading, the physical world of Springfield resets because it is a dream, and dreams do not maintain the physical consequences of events from previous cycles. The hospital room that Homer visits in one dream episode does not have to be the same hospital room he visited in a previous one, because the dream is not generating a continuous physical reality, but a series of emotional experiences that happen to share a setting. Under the radiation reading, the resets are a reflection of the population's impaired memory. They do not remember the damage because their ability to maintain continuous narrative about their environment has been compromised, so the environment they perceive corresponds to what they can hold, rather than to what is actually there. Under the collective denial reading, the resets are exactly what the principal and the pauper showed us they are. Votes made implicitly and continuously to proceed as though the damage didn't happen. What is interesting is that the show has, very occasionally, acknowledged the unreality of its own resets. There are episodes, not many, but enough to form a pattern in which a character notices that something has been restored without explanation, or that an event they remember having a significant consequence appears to have left no trace. The show plays these moments quickly, usually as a joke, and moves on. But the acknowledgement is there. The show knows that it resets. It occasionally looks directly at you while it resets and asks whether you've noticed, and then it moves on before you have time to formulate an answer. The Springfield tire fire is one of those background details that rewards attention. The tire fire has been burning since at least the show's second season. It is an established feature of the Springfield landscape, visible in establishing shots of the town, referenced occasionally in dialogue, accepted by everyone in Springfield as simply part of what Springfield looks like. Nobody has made a serious effort to extinguish it. The environmental consequences of an open tire fire burning indefinitely in a populated area, the particulate matter, the volatile compounds released by burning rubber, the effect on local air quality are not discussed. The fire is simply there, burning, as it has always burned, as it apparently always will burn, and Springfield has decided that this is one of the things that is true about this town, and that adjustment to it is the appropriate response. The Shelbyville rivalry provides a different kind of background detail. Springfield's relationship with its neighboring town of Shelbyville is depicted across multiple episodes as a long-standing institutional hostility with historical roots that the show sketches in deliberate broad strokes. The towns were founded by the same man who subsequently had a disagreement with himself severe enough to produce two separate settlements that have viewed each other with suspicion ever since. The specific nature of the founding disagreement is played for a particular kind of absurdist comedy that the show does well, taking something obviously trivial and treating it with the seriousness that historical grievances accumulate in communities that have never been given a good reason to let them go. What the Shelbyville rivalry illustrates, in addition to its more immediate satirical purpose, is the way Springfield understands itself through its relationship to what it is not. Shelbyville is always positioned as Springfield's opposite in some crucial respect: more cautious, where Springfield is reckless; more organized, where Springfield is chaotic; more willing to engage seriously with the consequences of its own decisions, where Springfield maintains its practiced unawareness of consequence. Whether this distinction is accurate within the show's universe, or whether it is simply the story Springfield tells itself about Shelbyville to feel better about itself, the show never quite resolves. But there is something worth noting about the geography of the rivalry. Shelbyville is always there. It is always the next town over, always visible in relation to Springfield, always available as a point of comparison and competition. And yet, in all the episodes that feature Shelbyville, in all the interactions between the two communities, the environmental situation of Shelbyville is never discussed in relation to Springfield's. If Springfield's water is contaminated from the nuclear plant's runoff, and if the river flows in some direction relative to Shelbyville, the question of what Springfield's contamination is doing to its downstream neighbor is one that the show never raises. Either Shelbyville is upstream, or the contamination is so perfectly contained within Springfield's municipal boundaries that it respects them the way it doesn't respect any other boundary the show tries to establish. Or the question simply hasn't occurred to anyone in either town. The show's relationship with science and expertise is one of its more consistent comedic textures. Springfield has doctors, lawyers, scientists, and various other professionals whose expertise is relevant to the situations the show depicts, and almost universally, these experts fail to notice the things that their expertise should make most visible. The doctors who treat Springfield residents don't appear to track the population-level health anomalies that the radiation theory would predict should be glaringly obvious to anyone with medical training and access to the relevant data. The lawyers who operate in Springfield's legal system don't appear to question the constitutional validity of a judicial decree, making it illegal to state a verifiable historical fact. The scientists at various institutions don't appear to follow up on Blinky the three-eyed fish in any systematic way. This consistent professional failure could be read as satire of professional class incompetence, which is one of the show's enduring themes. It could be read as a consequence of the cognitive impairment that the radiation theory proposes has affected the entire population, including its professionals. It could be read as another expression of the collective denial mechanism, in which professional expertise bends to serve the consensus about what is and isn't real, rather than maintaining its integrity against the consensus. Or it could be read as the show simply declining to depict the institutional responses that would end the story it is trying to tell, choosing narrative convenience over consistency. All of these readings are available, and none of them is definitively ruled out by anything the show establishes. The question of what other long-term residents of Springfield know, and what they have decided to do with what they know, is worth spending a moment on. The Flanderses have been next door to the Simpsons since the show began. Ned Flanders is, by every available depiction, a man of considerable moral seriousness and genuine attentiveness to the world around him. He notices things. He cares about things. He is not cognitively impaired in the way that the radiation theory suggests Homer is impaired. His brain works. His attention is present. His moral framework is functioning. And yet Ned Flanders does not appear to have connected the dots that the radiation theory asks us to connect. He has not organized Springfield's churches into a coalition demanding environmental accountability from the plant. He has not led a community response to the contamination of the local water supply. He has not done any of the things that a person with his apparent moral clarity and genuine community investment might be expected to do in response to the evidence that has been available for decades. This could be explained in several ways. The radiation theory would argue that Ned, despite his apparent clarity, has been exposed to the same contamination as everyone else and has experienced the same kind of cognitive effect, just manifesting differently in his particular biology. Where Homer's exposure reduced his capacity for analytical thought, Ned's exposure might have reduced his capacity for the specific kind of systemic analysis that connects individual observations to larger patterns, leaving him a man of genuine moral seriousness, but without the ability to organize that seriousness into a challenge to the structural cause of the problem. The psychological cage reading would argue that Ned's conditioning, imposed in childhood to suppress his aggression, also suppressed his capacity for confrontation. Confronting Burns directly, the kind of confrontation that the evidence about the plant would require, if it were to go anywhere, would require the ability to sustain and direct anger in a purposeful way. Ned's psychology was specifically engineered to prevent this. His compliance is pathological, reaching into every domain of his life, including the domain of civic confrontation with a powerful and malevolent institution. The collective denial reading would argue that Ned, as a member of Springfield, has participated in the same implicit agreement as everyone else. He has filed the evidence under things that are true about Springfield that cannot be addressed, alongside the tire fire and the three-eyed fish and the skeletons in the plant's basement and every other thing that the town's social contract has designated as outside the scope of what is officially acknowledged. And the coma reading would observe simply that Ned is a construct of Homer's dream, and Homer's dream does not require Ned to be capable of challenging the structural conditions that maintain the dream. The dream needs Ned to be the neighbor, the foil, the good man next door who represents the life Homer might have lived if things had gone differently. The dream does not need Ned to be a community organizer. The Simpsons' relationship with organized religion is one of the threads that the show has handled with more care than is immediately obvious. Springfield has a church, and the church has a congregation, and the congregation includes several characters whose faith is depicted with varying degrees of seriousness and sympathy. Ned Flanders' faith is depicted with the most seriousness and the most complexity, but the church itself functions as an institution in the town's social fabric in ways that go beyond Ned. The church is one of the places where the gap between the official version of Springfield's reality and the actual version could most easily be challenged. Religious communities have historically been among the most effective vehicles for exactly the kind of accountability that Burns has never faced grassroots, motivated by moral principle rather than self-interest, organized around a framework that puts the well-being of the community above the convenience of its most powerful members. The church in Springfield has never functioned this way. It has never organized around the environmental contamination, never demanded accountability from Burns, never used its moral authority to challenge the arrangement that keeps Homer Simpson in the safety inspector position. This is consistent with everything else about how Springfield functions. The institutions that should be most capable of challenging the status quo are instead absorbed into the status quo, maintaining their forms while serving the function the consensus requires of them, which is to provide a feeling of normality rather than to actually produce the conditions normality requires. The school deserves mention in this context. Springfield Elementary is presented as a deeply dysfunctional institution, underfunded and poorly administered, staffed by a combination of genuinely dedicated teachers and people who have given up on the enterprise in various ways. The children who attend it are being prepared, in the aggregate, not for any particular kind of life but for the continuation of the lives their parents live, which means, under the radiation theory, being prepared to live in Springfield, consume its water and air, work in its industries, maintain its social contract, and eventually have children who will do the same. Lisa's experience at Springfield Elementary is the show's clearest depiction of what this preparation looks like for a child who does not fit the template. She is too intelligent to be served by what the school offers, too morally serious to be comfortable in an environment that rewards different qualities, too aware of the gap between what school is supposed to do and what it actually does in her particular case to simply adapt. Her education at Springfield Elementary is, in significant measure, an education in the limits of what Springfield is capable of providing and in the specific cost of being the kind of person who notices those limits. Bart's experience is different and in some ways more interesting. Bart is not unintelligent, the show has established, across many episodes, that Bart has qualities the school's formal assessment of him doesn't capture, including genuine creativity, social intelligence, and a capacity for strategic thinking that would be useful in almost any context other than the one he is currently in. What Bart lacks is not intelligence but the specific kind of compliance that the school's structure is designed to reward. And because the school's structure is designed to reward compliance, and because Bart is constitutionally incapable of the relevant kind of compliance, Bart fails. Repeatedly, visibly, according to every metric the institution has available to it. Under the radiation theory, Bart's particular pattern of ability and limitation might reflect a specific kind of biological modification. The contamination didn't reduce his intelligence in the way it appears to have reduced Homer's. Bart is clearly sharper than his father in most operational respects. But it may have produced in him a particular relationship with authority and institutional structure that makes compliance feel not merely undesirable, but functionally impossible. The compulsive rebellion, the inability to simply go along with what is being asked of him even when going along would cost him nothing, the way he generates chaos, not as a strategy but almost reflexively, these could be read as adaptive responses that have calcified into a character trait, the external expression of a nervous system that has been modified to respond to institutional authority with resistance rather than acquiescence. The floating timeline produces a particular kind of pressure on all of these characters, one that the show has never fully examined but that the accumulated seasons make visible. Bart will be 10 years old forever. The rebellion will always be fresh. The pranks will always be possible. The possibility of becoming something other than what the current situation seems to be producing will always be open. But the school's verdict on him will also always be in place. The academic failures will always be present. The gap between his actual capabilities and his institutional record will never be resolved, because resolving it would require the passage of time. And time does not pass in Springfield. Lisa will be 8 forever. She will always be fighting the fight that the show has established she fights. The causes will always be worth fighting for, and the victories will always be partial, and the community will always be not quite ready to hear what she is saying. But the fight itself, the particular combination of hope and frustration that defines Lisa at 8, will also always be available. She will not age into a more weathered engagement with the limits of what change is possible, or a more efficient assessment of where effort is worth applying. She will remain in the particular stage where everything still seems worth fighting for, where the full weight of accumulated disappointment has not yet settled, where the saxophone is still being played into the Springfield night with genuine faith that someone will eventually understand what it means. These are the gifts and the costs of the floating timeline, held together in each character's frozen moment, sustainable only as long as the loop keeps running, as long as nobody presses play, as long as the agreement that time does not pass in Springfield holds through the next episode and the next season and the next decade of episodes after that. The agreement has held for 36 years. It will hold for as long as we need it to. There are mysteries in Springfield that don't receive the same sustained attention as the radiation theory or the coma theory or the Burns shooting, but that accumulate into something significant when you hold them together. Small threads in the tapestry that reward the particular kind of attention that tonight is designed to encourage. The question of Springfield's founding is one of them. The show has depicted in various flashback episodes the origins of the town in broad and sometimes contradictory strokes. The founding story involves a group of settlers who disagreed sufficiently about how the settlement should be organized that they split into two communities, one of which became Springfield and the other of which became Shelbyville. The specific nature of the disagreement is played for comedy. It involves a position on cousin marriage that the show treats with the deadpan irony. It applies to historical absurdity, but the founding split is presented as the original wound in Springfield's civic history, the moment from which the town's particular relationship with internal division and external rivalry derives. What the founding story also establishes, without explicitly saying so, is that Springfield began as a community organized around a disagreement, not around shared values or shared purpose or shared vision for what the settlement would become, around a split. The town's founding document, to the extent it has one, is not a charter of common purpose but a record of departure. The moment when people who could no longer agree on how to live together divided into camps, and the people who stayed were defined partly by what they were not. They were not the people who went to Shelbyville. This founding condition has produced, across the show's 36 seasons, a community that maintains its coherence through consensus about what is not, rather than agreement about what is. Springfield is not Shelbyville. Springfield does not acknowledge certain things. Springfield does not ask certain questions. Springfield is not the town that tests the water or challenges Burns or lets the real Skinner stay. The identity is defined by exclusion, by the things that are expelled or suppressed or voted out of the official version of what is real. The tire fire is this on a smaller scale. The tire fire has been burning for decades and nobody puts it out, not because the town has decided the fire is good, but because putting it out would require acknowledging that it is a problem, and acknowledging that it is a problem would require acknowledging the capacity for problems that Springfield has decided to manage through not acknowledging, rather than through addressing. The tire fire is the easiest version of this. The nuclear plant's violations are the hardest. The question of Springfield's media environment is also worth spending a moment on. The local television news, Channel 6, is a frequent presence in the show. Its reporters cover Springfield's events and its anchors deliver the news of the town's various catastrophes with a combination of professional form and casual indifference to the significance of what they are reporting that the show uses for satirical effect. A nuclear incident at the plant is reported with the same tone as a bake sale. An environmental disaster is covered with the same energy as a human interest story about a dog that learned to wave. Under the radiation theory, the media's failure to pursue the plant story is a symptom of the same cognitive impairment that affects the rest of the population. The journalists who cover Springfield are Springfield residents, exposed to the same contamination, operating under the same damaged critical faculties, unable to follow the story that is right in front of them, because the capacity for sustained analytical reasoning required to follow it has been degraded by the same exposure that degraded everyone else's. Under the collective denial reading, the media is simply another institution that has been absorbed into the consensus. Like the school and the church and the medical establishment and the legal system, the media in Springfield functions to reinforce the official version of reality rather than to interrogate it. This is, again, consistent with how media in actual small communities sometimes functions. The local paper in a small town is often embedded in the local power structures. It would need to challenge in order to report on them, and the reporting that results reflects this embeddedness. The tabloid dimension of Springfield's media environment, the sensationalism, the willingness to cover alien sightings and celebrity scandals, and Bart's pranks with equal conviction, is the show's satirical depiction of the way media that has given up on substance fills the resulting gap. When you can't report on the actual things that matter, you report with great enthusiasm on the things that don't. And the audience, unable to easily distinguish between the two, accepts the enthusiastic coverage as real engagement with the world. The question of groundskeeper Willie is one that the show has occasionally raised and then left unresolved in the way it leaves most things unresolved. Willie is, by every available depiction, a deeply unhappy man. Not unhappy in the comedic way that many Springfield residents are unhappy, through situational misfortune or the particular absurdist suffering that the show distributes to characters like molemen. Willie is unhappy in a specific, personal, historically grounded way. He is Scottish. He is in Springfield, apparently through a sequence of misfortunes he references but never fully explains, and he works at Springfield Elementary as the groundskeeper in conditions that the show depicts as physically brutal and professionally demeaning. His relationship with the institution he serves is one of the most consistently depicted difficult relationships in the show. He is underpaid, undervalued, given tasks that are well outside the reasonable scope of groundskeeping, and treated by administrators and teachers and students alike as existing primarily for the purpose of whatever is needed from him at any given moment. He endures this with a combination of resigned bitterness and explosive resentment that the show deploys for comedy, but that, under slow attention, reads as the portrait of a man who has spent years in an environment that has extracted everything it could from him and given back almost nothing. Willie is also, notably, not yellow. He is a guest character who has become a recurring character, who has become in some ways a semi-permanent fixture of the Springfield landscape, but he was not born in Springfield, and the show has never established that he has been in Springfield long enough for the contamination timeline to have produced the same effects in him as it has in lifelong residents. His ruddy complexion, his non-yellowed skin, his proportions that deviate from the Springfield standard in ways that mark him as someone whose biology was established outside the contamination zone. These are consistent with the radiation theory's framework, which predicts that the physical markers of Springfield's contamination should be visible primarily in residents who have been exposed for extended periods. Whether Willie has been in Springfield long enough for the contamination to be affecting him in ways that aren't yet visible is a question the show doesn't answer. He has been in Springfield for at least as long as the show has been depicting him, which is 36 seasons. The radiation theory would predict that 36 years of exposure would produce significant biological effects. If Willie looks different from the other residents now, in season 36, he should look more different than he did in season 2, when the exposure period was shorter. The show doesn't track this. Willie looks roughly the same in the current season as he did in the early ones, which is either a consequence of the floating timeline, nobody ages, nobody changes, or evidence that the contamination works differently on individuals born outside the zone than on those born within it. The floating timeline and the radiation theory are, at this level of analysis, in tension with each other. The floating timeline says nobody changes. The radiation theory implies that extended exposure should produce progressive effects. If both are true, then the radiation theory's timeline of effects must have been established before the floating timeline's starting point. The changes happened before the show began, and the show depicts the results of changes that are complete rather than the process of changes that are ongoing. The characters look the way they look because of what the contamination did to them before 1989, and the floating timeline preserves that state exactly, which is why nobody gets more yellow or more four-fingered as the seasons progress. The damage is done. The show just lives in it. Moe's Tavern occupies a specific place in Springfield's social ecosystem that is worth noting. Moe's is where the men of Springfield go when the domestic space is not adequate to what they are feeling, which in Homer's case is frequently. The tavern functions as a kind of emotional pressure valve for the town's working-class male population, a place where things that cannot be said in the house can be said, where feelings that the domestic situation requires to be managed can be expressed with less management, where the general frustration of living in Springfield can be voiced and briefly registered before the patrons return to their houses and their jobs and their continuing lives in the contamination zone. The conversations at Moe's reveal, over the course of many seasons, a population that is not as unaware of its own situation as the collective denial theory might suggest. The men who drink at Moe's have opinions about Burns, about the plant, about the state of the town, about the gap between how things are and how things should be. They express these opinions in the way that people express opinions in bars, with feeling, without plan, in the compressed and temporarily honest space that alcohol and absence from the domestic context sometimes creates. But the opinions expressed at Moe's have never translated into action. The awareness that surfaces in the bar does not survive the walk home. The clarity that alcohol occasionally produces in Springfield's residents, the moments when they see their situation with unusual precision and feel the weight of it with unusual sharpness, fades back into the fog before anything can be done with it, and the next evening they are back at the bar, expressing the same awareness that they expressed last night, which will fade again before morning. Under the radiation theory, this is cognitive impairment operating in a specific way. The capacity for acute awareness is periodically intact, but the capacity for sustained awareness for holding the thing clearly enough, for long enough, to act on it has been compromised. The insights arise and dissolve. The understanding surfaces and sinks, and the bar fills up again the following evening. Under the coma theory, the conversations at Moe's are Homer's unconscious mind processing its own situation from multiple angles simultaneously, using the various characters who populate the tavern as externalized versions of different parts of Homer's own awareness. The man who knows something is wrong but can't quite name it. The man who has named it but can't do anything about it. The man who has decided not to care because caring too much costs too much. The man who cares anyway because he can't help it and pays the cost. Homer's dreaming mind populates the bar with these variations on awareness and resignation, and gives them names and faces and drinks, and they talk through the evening, and nobody does anything, and the dream continues. The question of what Springfield's water actually tastes like is one that the show has occasionally approached and then retreated from. There are episodes in which characters comment on the local water, usually to note that it is unusual in some way, that it has a quality or a character that distinguishes it from the water of other places. These comments are played as jokes and moved past. But the accumulated comments, held together, suggest a population that notices something about the water and has developed various mental categories for dismissing the noticings. It is just how Springfield water tastes. It has always tasted this way. The taste is part of what makes Springfield Springfield, one of those distinctive local qualities that people who grow up somewhere accept as the texture of home. This is how contamination works in actual communities. The people who grew up with the contaminated water don't have a reference point that isn't contaminated. The baseline they compare to is the water they have always drunk, which is the contaminated water. The contamination doesn't taste wrong to them because they have never tasted right. They have no comparison. Springfield's water tastes like Springfield's water, and Springfield's residents have always found it adequate. The question of Springfield's medical infrastructure is one that the radiation theory requires to have a specific answer. If the contamination has been producing population-level biological effects for decades, the four-fingered hands, the yellow skin, the anatomical anomalies that distinguish Springfield residents from visitors. The medical establishment in Springfield has been observing these effects in every patient it treats. Springfield's doctors have access to the evidence. They see the Springfield body. They see the visitor body. They see the difference. The show has never depicted a physician making this observation explicitly. It has depicted doctors who are incompetent, doctors who are indifferent, doctors who are genuinely trying and failing because Springfield's medical establishment is under-resourced and overburdened and operating in conditions that make good medicine difficult. But it has never depicted a doctor who noticed the population-level anomalies and decided to investigate them. Either the doctors are genuinely incapable of making this observation, which the radiation theory would attribute to their own contamination, or they have made the observation and chosen not to pursue it, which the collective denial theory would attribute to the same social contract that keeps everyone in Springfield from pursuing the things they notice. Or there is a third possibility that the show has hinted at in a few episodes. Burns's influence extends into the medical establishment, the same way it extends into the legal establishment and the political establishment and every other institution in the town he essentially owns, and the doctors in Springfield who might have noticed have found reasons, in the course of their careers, not to notice officially. This would be consistent with the crayon detail. If someone in Springfield's medical establishment knew that Homer had a foreign object in his brain and chose not to remove it, that decision required either extraordinary negligence or the active exercise of discretion in a specific direction. The show leaves this open. It raises the possibility and then withdraws it, the way it raises and withdraws most of Springfield's most disturbing implications. That is appropriate. Some stories are better as mysteries than as answers. Springfield is one of them. The questions that the show raises and doesn't resolve are more alive than any resolution could make them, more present in the mind as you turn the lights lower and let the evening settle around you. They will still be there tomorrow. The cooling towers will still be there tomorrow. The river will still be running. Bart will still be 10. Lisa will still be 8. Maggie will still be watching. And somewhere in Springfield General, the monitors will still be beeping, and the family will still be on the couch in the dream, exactly as they were when the dream began. Exactly as they will be when you wake up and turn on whatever device you use to find them. The loop continues. Springfield waits. And the night, as it always does, eventually releases you into whatever sleep has been assembling itself around the edges of the last few hours. There is a dimension of Springfield's mysteries that receives almost no attention in discussions of the show's deeper meanings, perhaps because it operates in a register that analytical attention doesn't naturally reach. The music of The Simpsons, the score composed by Alf Clausen for the first 27 seasons, and by various composers since, carries information that the dialogue and the visuals are not quite saying aloud. The show's main theme, composed by Danny Elfman, establishes in its opening bars a particular emotional register that is difficult to describe precisely but immediately recognizable to anyone who has heard it even once. Something simultaneously playful and melancholy, energetic and nostalgic, an irresolvable combination of the feeling that things are fun right now and the feeling that they might not always be fun, that the fun is happening against a backdrop that is not entirely fun, that the playfulness of the bells and the strings and the particular synthetic bounce of the melody exists in tension with something the melody is not quite saying directly. This tension is baked into the theme at the level of its musical construction. The Elfman theme is in a major key, which conventionally signals brightness and optimism, but it contains harmonic shifts that create moments of instability, places where the ear expects resolution, and the melody pivots to something adjacent to resolution that is not quite the thing it suggested. These pivots are fast enough to miss in casual listening, but they are there in every iteration of the theme, and they accumulate into the particular quality the theme has of being both immediately satisfying and slightly unfinished. That quality is Springfield. Springfield is both immediately satisfying and slightly unfinished. The family on the couch is both exactly right and not quite what it should be. The town is both the town you know and the town you don't quite know, the town that provides the comfort of familiarity and the unease of impossibility simultaneously. The score within episodes follows a similar principle. The show deploys its musical vocabulary with precision that years of accumulated viewing have made semi-conscious for dedicated fans, without necessarily making explicit. There is music for Homer's incompetence, and music for Marge's patient endurance, and music for Lisa's particular kind of fighting hopefulness. And the distinctions between these musical registers carry emotional information that supplements what the dialogue provides. The music for Homer's moments of clarity, the rare episodes in which Homer perceives his situation with unusual sharpness, in which the fog lifts briefly, and he sees something as different from the music for his ordinary episodes. The cue that plays when Homer cries, which happens more often than the surface-level reading of his character would predict, has a quality that is not deployed anywhere else in the show's score, a specific combination of orchestration and melody that registers as the show being sincere in a way it is not always sincere. Lisa's saxophone, played within episodes by the character and composed for the show as a recurring musical element, is worth its own attention. The saxophone is the instrument that most closely matches Lisa's particular relationship with expression, capable of enormous range, from the lowest register to the highest, from the most private introspection to the most extroverted statement, from jazz to classical to everything in between, and never quite fitting into any single category comfortably. Lisa's saxophone doesn't sound like the saxophone in any particular genre. It sounds like Lisa, which means it sounds like a mind that has too many things in it to settle into any single key. When Lisa plays in episodes, the show sometimes uses the music to say things that Lisa cannot say aloud. The saxophone expresses the things she has identified and cannot articulate, the feelings she has processed and cannot share, the understanding she has developed and cannot deploy in Springfield because Springfield is not ready for it. The music becomes her language when the show's language isn't adequate to what she carries. This is perhaps the most precise possible expression of what the radiation theory and the coma theory and the collective denial theory are all circling. The knowledge that Springfield carries and cannot quite deploy, the understanding that surfaces in music and in the moments just before sleep, and in the particular attentiveness of late-night engagement with material that rewards it, the things that are present in the show and not quite said, present in the town and not quite acknowledged, present in Homer's dreaming mind and not quite brought to consciousness. The music knows, the theme knows, the saxophone knows, and the night, as it settles around whatever room you are in, knows too the particular way that late-night attention knows things that daytime attention doesn't, the way the mind softens into a receptivity that allows the frequencies below normal hearing to be briefly felt. Springfield hums at that frequency. It always has. Listen for it in the time between reading and sleep, in the moment when the day's noise finally settles and the room is dark, and the cooling towers on the edge of the impossible town are breathing their steam into the night sky. You might hear it. There is something that the show has never quite addressed directly, something that sits in the background of 36 seasons of Springfield family life and becomes more visible the longer you look at it. Springfield is full of children, not just the Simpson children. The town is populated with them, running through the halls of Springfield Elementary, crowding the schoolyard, filling the seats of classrooms overseen by teachers who are, in almost every case, either actively hostile to their students' development or so overwhelmed by the conditions of the school that genuine education has become a secondary concern at best. Bart Simpson is the child the show foregrounds as its central young figure, and Bart's relationship with formal education is one of the most sustained comedic threads in the series. He fails tests, he disrupts classes, he antagonizes Skinner with a creativity and persistence that the show treats as evidence of his intelligence, even as the school treats it as evidence of his deficiency. Bart is, by the school's assessment, a problem to be managed rather than a mind to be developed. He has been assessed, evaluated, and categorized as a child who will not amount to much, and the school has largely given up on the project of changing that assessment. What the show reveals, across many seasons, is that Bart's apparent educational failure conceals a different kind of intelligence: practical, social, creative, rooted in the actual experience of navigating a complicated world rather than in the abstract competencies that the school measures. Bart understands people. He understands systems in the way that people who operate outside systems often understand them better than people inside them. He sees the gaps, the inconsistencies, the places where the official framework doesn't match the operational reality. He exploits these gaps with what the show depicts as mischief, but which, under closer attention, reads as a sophisticated ongoing analysis of how power actually works in Springfield. Bart has successfully manipulated Skinner, Burns, local politicians, media figures, and his own family with a consistency that suggests genuine strategic intelligence. The pranks that seem like mere disruption are often, in their execution, demonstrations of planning and social modeling that exceed what the school attributes to him. He predicts how authority figures will respond to provocation with an accuracy that requires a detailed internal model of their psychology. He stages events with a theatrical precision that requires the same kind of sequential thinking that formal education is theoretically designed to develop. But the school cannot measure this. The school measures what the school measures, and Bart fails to perform on those measures, and the school's conclusion is that Bart is failing. This conclusion becomes, over time, part of Bart's own self-understanding. He internalizes the school's assessment not because it is accurate, but because institutions that assess you consistently in a particular way eventually shape the way you assess yourself. Bart believes he is not intelligent because Springfield Elementary has told him this repeatedly, using the only instruments it has, which are instruments he was not built to perform well on. The radiation theory offers one reading of this. If Springfield's contaminated environment affects cognitive development, and if it affects different children differently, amplifying some capacities while diminishing others, then Bart's particular profile of intelligence and academic failure might be a mutation effect, the same general cause that produced Homer's specific pattern of impairment and Maggie's specific pattern of enhancement operating in a third distinct way, in a third distinct brain. Bart's intelligence is real, but it is not the intelligence that formal education rewards, and the contamination may have shaped which kinds of intelligence developed and which did not, producing a mind that is genuinely capable in ways that are genuinely invisible to the institutional framework designed to assess capability. The coma theory offers a different and more emotionally weighted reading. If Homer is dreaming, then Bart is the child Homer most needs to believe in, the child who is difficult and disruptive and apparently failing, but who is fundamentally good, fundamentally capable, fundamentally someone worth fighting for. Homer's dream needs Bart to be redeemable, It needs the evidence of his intelligence to be present, available to anyone who looks at him with the right kind of attention, which is the kind of attention a father gives a son. The school sees a problem. Homer's dreaming mind sees a kid. And the kid is always, in the dream, fundamentally okay. Lisa's relationship with Springfield Elementary is different from Bart's, in ways that the show has explored with unusual depth. Where Bart fails to perform on the school's measures, Lisa exceeds them dramatically, and this excess creates its own form of invisibility. Lisa is too smart for the school. The curriculum cannot accommodate her. The teachers do not know what to do with a student who has already read what they are teaching and is waiting, with contained impatience, for the class to reach a point where she cannot continue on her own. The school was built for a distribution of student capability, and Lisa is at a tail of that distribution that the school's infrastructure was not designed to serve. What happens to children who are at the tails of distributions in under-resourced institutions is that they get ignored. Not with malice. Usually the teachers at Springfield Elementary are not, with some exceptions, actively hostile to Lisa's development. They are simply operating a system that has a finite capacity, and that capacity is correctly directed at the students in the middle of the distribution who need it most, and the students at the tails get what is left over, which is attention that comes after the more urgent needs have been addressed, and which often runs out before it reaches them. So Lisa learns largely on her own. She reads outside the curriculum. She develops intellectual interests that the school does not share, and pursues them without the institutional support that would, in a better-resourced school, be available to her. She becomes what gifted children in under-resourced environments often become: intensely self-reliant intellectually and correspondingly isolated socially, because the intellectual development has outpaced the social one, and the peers who share her intellectual level are not present in her immediate environment, and the adults who could bridge the gap are too busy keeping the institution running to provide the mentorship that her particular development requires. This is not unusual. It happens in real schools in real towns, and the show's depiction of it is one of the ways that Springfield functions as a genuine diagnosis of American educational conditions as much as it functions as satire. The gifted child who falls through the gap between the school's capacity and her needs is a real phenomenon, and Lisa is its portrait. The episode where Lisa is moved to a remedial class because of a standardized test scoring anomaly is one of the show's clearest statements about this. When the institutional machinery places her in the wrong category, it takes sustained effort from outside the institution to correct the error, because institutions are not built to notice their own misclassifications. The machinery runs, and the child ends up wherever the machinery puts her, and if the machinery is wrong, the child needs someone outside the machinery to see the error. Springfield Elementary is also the site of the show's most consistent depiction of institutional failure as a consequence of resource deprivation rather than individual incompetence. The school has no money. Burns's oil well theft in the first part of the Burns shooting two-parter destroys the school budget. The school loses programs, music, sports, arts that the show has established are important to the development of specific children, most notably Lisa's saxophone program, and Bart's connection to physical education, which is the one domain in which his particular kind of intelligence finds a compatible context. When the programs are cut, the children lose the spaces where they were most themselves. The school's resource crisis does not just impoverish the educational offering. It removes the specific contexts in which specific children were able to find something that worked for them, and replaces those contexts with whatever the diminished budget can provide, which is usually less of the things that were working and more of the things that weren't. Milhouse Van Houten is a character who has received considerably less analytical attention than the Simpson children, but who rewards it. Milhouse is Bart's best friend, and the friendship is one of the most honestly depicted relationships in the show. Real, warm, complicated, with the particular dynamic that forms between children of different social temperaments when they find in each other something they cannot easily find elsewhere. Bart needs someone who will follow him, who believes in him, who is present for the adventures without competing for the position of adventurer. Milhouse needs someone who will lead, who will impose structure on a social experience that Milhouse's own social anxiety makes difficult to navigate independently. They each provide something the other genuinely needs, which is why the friendship has lasted 36 seasons. But Milhouse is also, in the show's consistent depiction, a child who is suffering in ways that the comedy around him occasionally obscures. His parents' marriage is difficult and eventually ends in divorce. His social position at school is precarious. He is not as confidently positioned as his friendship with Bart might suggest, and without Bart, he is visibly vulnerable to the social dynamics of the Springfield elementary hierarchy. His self-esteem is consistently depicted as fragile, dependent on external validation in a way that Bart's is not, susceptible to the particular kind of damage that children do to each other without quite intending to. Under the radiation theory, Milhouse is interesting because his particular profile of vulnerability, the anxiety, the social fragility, the dependency could be read as a contamination effect that manifests in the psychological dimension rather than the physical one. The theory predicts population-level effects, not individual-level specificity, but if the contamination interacts with genetic predispositions, then its effects would be as various as the people it affects, and Milhouse's specific psychological profile might reflect a specific interaction between his specific predispositions and the specific contamination profile of Springfield's environment. The children of Springfield Elementary are, collectively, a portrait of a generation raised inside the contamination zone, with all of the resources that were available to them, which were not enough. They are doing the best they can with what they have, which is the same thing the adults are doing, which is the same thing everyone in Springfield has always done. They are not failing because they are insufficient. They are navigating conditions that are genuinely difficult, in an institution that is genuinely under-resourced, in a town that has been systematically deprived of the capacity to care for itself by the same forces that have been systematically depriving it of clean water and safe air, and politicians who answer to anyone other than the man at the top of the hill. The children of Springfield will grow up. In the floating timeline, they will remain the age. They are, forever, frozen in the grades they currently occupy, never graduating, never moving on. But in the version of Springfield that exists beneath the floating timeline, in the version that the show has occasionally glimpsed in its flash-forward episodes, the children grow into adults who carry Springfield with them into whatever lives they build afterward. Lisa becomes whoever she becomes. Bart becomes whoever he becomes. And whatever they become, they carry the contamination zone in their bodies, the school's assessment in their self-understanding, the town's particular way of forgetting in their memory, and the dream if the coma theory is right in their very existence. They are the future of Springfield. They are also the future of the dream. And as long as Homer is dreaming, they never have to become it. The question of how Springfield functions economically is one that the show raises constantly through the daily details of the characters' financial lives, and one that it never answers systematically, because a systematic answer would require confronting something about Springfield's economic structure that the show has been depicting in pieces for 36 years without quite assembling. Homer Simpson makes, in various episodes, somewhere between $12,000 and $25,000 per year, depending on which reference the show is using and which decade the floating timeline has landed in. The family lives in a 4-bedroom house in a residential neighborhood, feeds and clothes 3 children, maintains a car, and manages to fund Homer's considerable food and beer consumption on this income. The financial arithmetic does not quite work in the way that the financial arithmetic of many American working-class families does not quite work, and the show treats the gap between income and expenditure the way many of those families treat it, not as a sustainable situation, but as the current situation, managed 1 week at a time through a combination of luck, community, and the particular financial creativity of people who have been doing math that doesn't add up for long enough that they have developed expertise in making it function anyway. This is one of the show's most accurate depictions of actual working-class economic experience. The family is not poor in the way that material deprivation makes visible, but the margin between stability and crisis is thin enough that disruptions, job loss, medical emergency, unexpected expense repeatedly push them toward the edge. The episodes in which the family faces financial collapse are not treated as exceptional catastrophes, but as recurrent features of their situation, the periodic actualization of a risk that is always present but usually managed. Burns has engineered this. Not Homer's specific financial situation necessarily, but the general economic structure of Springfield within which Homer's situation is entirely typical. Burns owns the power plant, which is the town's largest employer and its primary source of electrical power. The plant's employment practices set the wage floor for the town's working class, because an employer with a monopoly on both a resource and a labor market has considerable leverage in determining what it will pay. Workers who cannot afford to leave Springfield, or who have family and community roots that make leaving practically difficult, accept the wages that are offered because the alternative unemployment in a town with few other large employers is worse than the wages. The town's other businesses exist within the economic structure that Burns's plant creates. The convenience stores, the taverns, the restaurants, the small retail establishments that populate Springfield's commercial landscape. These are the businesses that serve a working-class population whose income is determined substantially by what Burns pays. And Burns deducts. The money cycles through the town at the wage level that Burns has set, and the businesses that serve the workers are calibrated to that level. And the workers spend what they earn in businesses that earn what workers can spend, and the whole system loops at the level Burns established and maintains. This is a company town. Springfield has all the features of a company town that the company doesn't technically own. There is private property, there are other employers, there is the formal apparatus of municipal government and its attendant institutions. But the economic reality underneath the formal structure is that one employer, through its control of a critical resource and its position as the dominant employer, sets the terms for the town's economic life in ways that the formal structure does not capture and does not constrain. Moe's Tavern exists in this economy. It is one of the businesses that absorbs a portion of the wages that Burns pays. A portion means that Burns's wage decisions ripple through Moe's balance sheet in ways that Moe almost certainly does not think about explicitly, but that determine whether Moe can keep the lights on. When Burns nearly destroys Moe's through the events leading up to the shooting by actions that impoverish his workers enough that their discretionary spending collapses, Moe is not the victim of Burns's direct intervention in his business. He is the victim of Burns's management of the town's economic conditions, which is indirect but not therefore less consequential. Apu's Quickie Mart occupies a specific position in the Springfield economy that the show has used for satirical purpose and that also reflects something real about how convenience retail functions in working-class communities. The Quickie Mart is open when other businesses aren't, serves food that is available when other food isn't, and functions as a node of accessibility in a community where the larger retail infrastructure is calibrated to hours and locations that don't always align with the rhythms of shift work at a nuclear plant. Apu's particular position in Springfield, hardworking, community-embedded, expert in the needs of his customers, in the way that only long service in a single location produces, is the show's portrait of a specific kind of small business ownership that exists in specific kinds of working-class communities. The Flanders Sporting Goods store represents a different economic position, the small business owned by someone who has managed, through the combination of personal frugality, financial responsibility, and what appears to be genuine business acumen, to achieve a level of economic stability that the Simpson household never quite reaches. Ned's relative financial security: he can afford a pool, he replaces his roof, he lends Homer money repeatedly without apparent financial strain, is consistent with someone who has built a business on a sustainable model, in a market he understands and has served well. The contrast between Ned's economic position and Homer's is not random. The show has established that Homer is not poor because he is stupid, though the stupidity doesn't help, but because the economic position that Burns has created for his workers is one of sustained precarity. The wages are set to be enough to keep workers in Springfield, but not enough to give them genuine economic security. Security would give them options. Options would give them leverage. Leverage would threaten Burns's position. The wages are calibrated to prevent this, and the calibration is precise enough that the Simpson family is perpetually one crisis away from the edge and never quite over it. This is not accident. This is policy. Burns' management of the plant, Burns's management of the town, Burns's relationship with the political and legal institutions of Springfield, all of it is directed at a single outcome: the maintenance of conditions in which Burns's position is unassailable. Economic precarity in the workforce is part of this. A workforce that cannot afford to resist is a workforce that does not resist. A workforce that does not resist is a workforce that does not investigate. A workforce that does not investigate is a workforce that does not notice the three-eyed fish or the cracked cooling towers or the skeletons in the basement. The economic structure of Springfield is a containment system. It works with the radiation and the collective denial and the political capture to create a community that cannot meaningfully challenge the conditions of its own existence, because all of the resources that would be required to mount such A challenge time, money, legal access, political representation, informational clarity are either unavailable to the working-class residents or actively controlled by the entity they would need to challenge. Homer cannot sue Burns because he cannot afford a lawyer, and Burns owns the only lawyers in Springfield who are capable of taking on a case of that complexity. He cannot organize his co-workers because the plant's surveillance infrastructure, which is extensive and depicted occasionally in episodes that treat it as comedy monitors, labor organizing with the same attention it gives to safety violations, which is to say that it watches for it carefully and responds to it before it can develop. He cannot vote for politicians who would regulate the plant because Burns's donations ensure that the politicians available to vote for are all, in various ways, aligned with Burns's interests. This is not a conspiracy theory about the show. This is the show. The show depicts this system with consistent detail across 36 seasons. It shows you Burns owning politicians. It shows you the plant's surveillance of workers. It shows you the legal and financial asymmetry that ensures Homer can never successfully challenge the conditions of his employment. It treats all of this as comedy background, but the background accumulates into a portrait of a system that is operating exactly as it was designed to operate. And the system's ultimate product is not electricity. The electricity is incidental. The system's ultimate product is Springfield, this particular community, in this particular condition, with these particular residents, living in this particular relationship to the power that dominates their lives and the water they drink and the air they breathe. Burns didn't build the system to generate power. He built it to generate Springfield. And Springfield is exactly what he needed. Burns won. He has always won. The economy of Springfield is his most complete victory. More complete than his political influence, more complete than his medical immortality, more complete than any individual scheme the show has depicted. He has built a town that cannot conceive of replacing him, and he has kept it running long enough that the people inside it no longer remember what it would feel like to try. That is the final piece of the economic picture. Not just that Burns controls Springfield, but that Springfield has stopped imagining the possibility of being controlled by anything other than Burns. The imagination is the resource that has been most completely captured. You cannot build an alternative to what you cannot imagine existing. And in the contamination zone, where the same radiation that keeps Burns alive in his weekly treatments has slowly, over decades, degraded the imaginative capacity of the population, the alternative is very difficult to imagine indeed. There is a kind of memory that is specific to places rather than to people. The physical features of a town, its buildings, its streets, its particular configuration of public and private space, the way the light falls on a specific corner in the late afternoon, carry information about the town's history in forms that persist even when the people who made that history are gone. You can read a town the way you can read a text, if you know the language. Springfield has been read extensively over 36 seasons of the show, and what the reading reveals is a town whose physical memory is as unstable as its residents' biological one. Buildings appear and disappear between episodes without acknowledgement. Streets that ran east-west in one season run north-south in another. The geography of downtown Springfield shifts to accommodate whatever the episode's story requires, without the show feeling any obligation to reconcile the current geography with the previous one. This is, in the surface reading, a consequence of the show's production process. Different writers, different animators, different directorial decisions across hundreds of episodes produced over decades, without the kind of continuity supervision that a live-action production would require. The inconsistencies are production artifacts, not narrative choices. But in the framework of the theories the show's fans have developed, Springfield's geographic instability is something else. It is the town's physical environment doing what the town's social environment does, refusing to be fixed, refusing to be mapped, refusing to submit to the kind of stable documentation that would make accountability possible. A building that was on Main Street in Season 4 and is on 3rd Avenue in Season 12 cannot be subpoenaed. A street that ran in one direction in one episode and in a different direction in another episode cannot be used to establish the location of a crime. The town's physical incoherence is, in this reading, an extension of its social incoherence. The same principle that keeps Springfield's state affiliation undefined and its regulatory jurisdiction perpetually unclear extends to its physical architecture, producing an environment that is experientially real to its residents but documentarily elusive to anyone trying to establish its permanent features. The tire fire is the exception. The tire fire is always in the same place. The tire fire is the one fixed geographical feature of Springfield's physical landscape, the one thing that does not shift between episodes, the one landmark you can count on to be where it was before. And the tire fire is, of course, the thing nobody wants to fix, the town's most visible failure, the evidence of a problem that has been burning long enough that it has become part of the landscape rather than an anomaly within it. The tire fire's geographic stability is itself a kind of dark joke. Everything in Springfield that is good, everything that is functional, everything that serves the residents' needs, the schools, the streets, the businesses, the infrastructure, this is what shifts and moves and refuses to be reliably located. The one fixed thing, the one stable landmark, is the fire that nobody has put out. Moe's Tavern also maintains unusual geographic stability, which the coma theory would read as significant. If Homer is dreaming, the places that anchor his emotional life would be the most stably located in the dream: his house, Moe's, the plant, the places he visits so often that his memory has fixed their coordinates with unusual precision. The places he visits less, the places with less emotional weight in his experience, would be less precisely located in the dream, more subject to the drift that dream geography typically exhibits. This is largely consistent with the show's depiction. The Simpson house is always in the same place. Moe's is always in the same approximate location. The plant is always visible on the skyline. The things Homer cares about most are the things the dream places most reliably. The things that are peripheral to Homer's emotional life are the things that shift. The Springfield Elementary School maintains relative geographic stability, which the coma theory would also explain. Homer cares about where his children go to school, even if he doesn't always demonstrate this caring effectively. The dream places the school because Homer places the school in his memory. The places that shift most dramatically are the places Homer has the least emotional investment in. The government buildings, the retail establishments that are not the quick E-Mart, the streets between the places Homer actually goes. These are the parts of the dream that the dreaming mind populates with whatever it has available at the moment, without the precise coordinate fixing that emotional weight provides. If you mapped Springfield's geographic instability against Homer's emotional relationships with different parts of the town, the map of instability and the map of emotional investment might be surprisingly inversely correlated. The places he loves are the places the dream can reliably find. The places he doesn't care about are the places the dream has to improvise. The Springfield Cemetery is worth a specific mention. The cemetery appears in multiple episodes and maintains reasonable geographic consistency, which is significant given the emotional weight it carries for the Simpson family. Homer's mother is not buried there, her grave is a lie, as the show reveals, but the cemetery is where Springfield's dead are acknowledged to exist, where the town maintains its relationship with the mortality it otherwise does its best to forget. The cemetery is also the site of Homer and Mona's reunion, which makes it the place where the most important thing that has happened to Homer's understanding of his own life actually happened. He found his mother at a cemetery. He thought he was visiting a grave that wasn't a grave. He found a life that wasn't dead. The cemetery is the place in Springfield where the official version of death can turn out to be wrong, where the person you thought was gone can turn out to be standing next to the headstone they don't belong to. Under the coma theory, the cemetery is where Homer's dreaming mind processes its deepest anxieties about what is real and what is not real, about who is actually gone and who might still be present somewhere, about whether the losses are permanent or whether the permanent versions of things might still be recoverable if you look in the right place. Homer visits the cemetery and finds his mother alive. The dreaming mind's version of grief. The grief doesn't have to be final. The grave doesn't have to be real. If you go to where the dead are supposed to be, you might find them waiting, alive, apologizing for having been gone so long. That is what Homer needed. That is what the dream gave him. Not resolution, the dream doesn't provide resolution. Resolution would end the dream but the moment. The reunion. Mona alive at the cemetery, holding her son after 27 years, explaining that she never stopped loving him. And then she had to leave again, because the dream was not ready to let Homer have what he needed. And then she died, in a later season, a quiet death that the show handled with unusual sincerity, and Homer lost her for the last time. The dream gave him the reunion. The dream took it back, because the dream is not a wish fulfillment machine. The dream is Homer's memory, and Homer's memory contains the full truth of his life, which is that the people you love leave, and then you get them back for a moment, and then you lose them permanently, and the permanent loss is what you have to live with. even in the dream, even in the state of perpetual present tense where nobody is supposed to age and nothing is supposed to end. Mona's death penetrated the dream because some losses are too real to be kept out even by the unconscious mind's defenses. The dream let her in. The dream let her die. Because Homer's mind knew, at whatever level the dreaming mind knows things, that the alternative, a Springfield in which Mona is perpetually present and perpetually alive, and the 27 stolen years are permanently undone, was not available. Not even in the dream. Not even in the coma. The geography of Springfield's memory is the geography of what the town, which is to say what Homer can hold and what he must let go. The fixed locations are the things he is holding. The shifting locations are the things that are already partially released. And the cemetery, stable in the dream because it is where the most important release happened, is the map's key, the place that tells you, if you know how to read it, everything about the relationship between Springfield and the truth of what has been lost. In the final accounting of what the show is about, underneath the theories, underneath the mysteries, underneath the 36 seasons of satirical accumulation, The Simpsons is about love. Specifically, it is about the kind of love that exists in families that are not functioning particularly well. The love that persists in spite of evidence that it should not, that maintains itself through conditions that would defeat a more fragile affection, that is not romantic in the conventional sense, and not sentimental in the way that television families often are, but is real in the way that the show is real, which is to say imperfect and messy, and occasionally terrible and fundamentally present. Homer loves Marge. The show has depicted this love in ways that range from the deeply romantic to the practically negligent, and the range is part of the truth. People who love each other are not consistent. They are sometimes the best version of what love looks like, and sometimes the worst version. And the love is not the best moments or the worst moments, but the whole arc, the persistence across both, the decision usually not quite conscious, but real to remain. Homer's love for Marge is his most developed trait, in the sense that it is the trait that the show has been most careful with across the full run. He is stupid, but he loves her. He is selfish, but he loves her. He is irresponsible and thoughtless and repeatedly fails to be what she needs him to be, and he loves her. And the love is not a redemption for the failures, but it is a real thing that exists alongside them. The coma theory gives this love its most complete expression. If Homer is dreaming, then Marge is the center of the dream, the person whose presence the dream most requires, whose stability the dream most depends on, whose continued love for Homer the dream works hardest to maintain. Everything in the dream is negotiable except Marge's love. Every other element of Springfield can shift and contradict itself and reset without acknowledgement. But Marge continues to love Homer. In episode after episode, across 36 years, through everything the dream puts them through. Because if the dream ever stopped maintaining that, if the dreaming mind allowed the possibility that Marge stopped loving Homer while he was unconscious, that she moved on, that she built a life in the years the dream has been running, that does not include the man in the hospital bed, the dream would become unbearable. And the dreaming mind's primary function, in the coma reading, is to remain bearable, to generate the experience of a life that is worth remaining in, worth staying unconscious for, worth declining to wake up from. Marge loves Homer. The dream insists on this because Homer insists on it. Because if Marge stops loving Homer, there is no reason for Homer to keep dreaming, and there is no reason for the show to continue. The dream and the show have the same interest. Keep Homer and Marge together. Keep the couch occupied by both of them. Keep the house on Evergreen Terrace, a place where both of them live. This is not a small thing. The marriage of Homer and Marge Simpson is the longest continuously depicted marriage in American television history. 36 years of episodes, every one of which has them together in the specific way they are together, not peacefully, not always happily, not without friction and conflict, and the particular frustrations of two people who were perhaps not ideally suited to each other in the ways that romantic conventions emphasize, but together, present, choosing, implicitly, to remain. Homer loves his children in the way that people love things they cannot quite explain their love for, not because the children are easy to love, not because they always make him proud or happy or comfortable, but because they are his, which is a category that precedes reason and operates independently of performance. Bart embarrasses him and exasperates him, and has gotten him into more trouble than he can count, and Homer loves him with a steadiness that the exasperation doesn't touch. Lisa challenges him in ways he cannot always meet and makes him feel the limits of his intelligence more acutely than almost anything else in his experience. And Homer loves her with a particular quality of admiring bafflement that is one of the show's most honestly depicted emotions. And Maggie, who cannot speak, who cannot express what she understands, who watches everything from the position of the youngest and least powerful member of the household. Homer loves Maggie with the particular love that parents feel for the child who cannot yet tell them who they are, the love that is entirely projection and entirely real, the love that is directed at the person the child is becoming rather than the person they currently are, because the person they currently are is too young to have become the person yet. In the coma reading, Homer's love for Maggie is the most heartbreaking element of the dream. He cannot know her. He went into the coma when she was 1 year old, which means the Maggie who exists in the dream is the Maggie he knew before the coma, the Maggie of the first year, before any personality beyond the most basic had developed, before any of the person she would become had revealed itself. The Maggie in the dream is not the real Maggie, whoever the real Maggie has become in the years since April of 1993. The Maggie in the dream is Homer's idea of Maggie, his projection of who she might be, his hope for who she will become. And so the dream gives her extraordinary intelligence, because that is what Homer hopes for her. And the dream keeps her silent, because Homer knows at whatever level the dreaming mind knows things that if the dream gave Maggie a voice, it would have to give her the voice of whoever she actually is, the person who has grown up in the years Homer has been unconscious, and that person is a stranger. And the dream cannot accommodate strangers in the family. The pacifier stays in Maggie's mouth because the pacifier keeps the dream's version of Maggie intact. The silence keeps the hope alive. The day Maggie speaks the real day, not the dream day, is the day Homer would have to acknowledge how much time has passed, how completely unknown his youngest child has become, how deeply the coma has separated him from the family he is dreaming about. The love in The Simpsons is not the love that everything works out for. It is the love that continues when things don't work out, that persists through the working class precarity and the cognitive impairment and the contamination, and the employer who stole his mother, and the school that failed his children, and the neighbor whose wife he accidentally killed, the memory of a woman who kissed him goodnight when he was a child and was gone when he woke up. The love is what's left when everything else is stripped away, when the comedy is over and the satire is filed, and the mysteries remain unsolved, and the theories are held in whatever suspension we hold theories in at the end of a long night. What's left is Homer on the couch with Marge, Bart and Lisa somewhere in the house, Maggie in her crib with the pacifier moving in that familiar rhythm. The family together. Imperfect. Present. Continuing. That is the show. That is all of it, underneath everything. And if Homer is dreaming, then the dream is the most human thing imaginable. A man who loves his family, separated from them by something he didn't choose, spending whatever time remains in whatever consciousness remains constructing the most detailed and loving version of them that his damaged mind can manage, and returning them to the couch, together, every Sunday night, because that is where they belong, and he needs to see them there. The monitor beeps in Springfield General. The cooling towers breathe their steam into the dark. Somewhere in the dream, Homer opens a beer, settles onto the couch, puts his arm around Marge, and watches television. And somewhere in the audience, wherever you are, whatever time it is, whatever state of wakefulness or sleep you occupy right now, you are watching with him. Because that is what we came for. Not the theories, not the mysteries, not the 36 seasons of satirical accumulation. We came for the couch. We came for the family. We came for the feeling of belonging, briefly, to something that keeps going, that resets, that is there again on Sunday, that does not end. Springfield will be there tomorrow. Homer will be on the couch. Marge will be patient. Bart will be 10. Lisa will be 8. Maggie will be watching. The loop will continue, as it has continued for 36 years, as it may continue for 36 more, because we need it to, because the family on the couch is the family we carry, and as long as the loop runs, we are not quite alone, and the world is not quite as impermanent as it sometimes feels. Wherever Springfield is, whatever year it is in the dream, however long the loop has left, there is no other piece of American fiction that has done what The Simpsons has done simply by continuing. The accumulation is the achievement, not any single season, not any single episode, not any single joke or character or storyline. The accumulation, the 36 years, the 788 episodes, The uncountable number of hours of human attention that have been directed at this single family in this single impossible town. Most stories have an ending. Most characters reach a conclusion. Most fictional worlds are opened and closed within a span of time that allows the audience to understand the story as a complete thing, a shape with a beginning and a middle and an end, a meaning that the ending helps clarify, a resolution that confirms or complicates or overturns the expectations that the opening established. The Simpsons has none of this. It is not a story with an ending. It is a practice, like a daily meditation or a recurring dream, something you return to not because you expect it to resolve, but because the returning itself is the point. This is unusual in art. Most art asks you to receive it and then release it, to carry away whatever it gave you and move on. The Simpsons asks you to come back, and then to come back again, and then again. And the thing you receive on the 100th return is different from the thing you received on the first, not because the show has changed, it hasn't, in the most fundamental ways, but because you have, and the relationship between what the show is and what you bring to it changes as the thing you bring to it changes. People who watch the show as children and return to it as adults are watching something different from what they watched before. Not because the episodes are different, but because they are. The episode where Homer forgets Marge's birthday is a different episode when you are 8 than when you are 35 and you have forgotten a birthday and you remember the face of the person whose birthday you forgot and the specific quality of the silence that followed. The episode where Lisa struggles to make friends is a different episode when you are the child struggling than when you are the adult remembering what it felt like to struggle. The episode where Homer holds Maggie for the first time is a different episode before you have held a child than after. The show has been accumulating audience experience for 36 years, and the accumulation on the audience's side of the relationship is as significant as the accumulation on the show's side. The show's 788 episodes are not simply 788 pieces of content. They are 788 opportunities for the show and its audience to be in a particular relationship. And the relationship has its own history, its own development, its own set of memories that neither party can fully account for. This is what the mysteries and the theories are actually about, at the deepest level. They are the audience's attempt to give form to the relationship to account for what 36 years of returning to the same show has done to the way they see it, to find in the show's accumulated details and contradictions and buried storylines the evidence of a meaning that corresponds to the meaning the show has accumulated in their own lives. The radiation theory is not really about radiation. It is about what it feels like to have grown up inside a system that has shaped you in ways you are only beginning to understand, to look at the conditions of your own development and recognize the marks they have left on you, the cognitive patterns, the emotional habits, the particular ways you see the world that are not quite the ways someone who grew up somewhere different would see it. Springfield is every town, and every town shapes its residents, and the residents carry the town in their bodies and their minds long after they have left it, or even if they never leave. The coma theory is not really about Homer being unconscious. It is about the feeling of watching a show for decades and wondering whether the version of the show you're watching is the real one or a version that has drifted from something it once was, whether the show you love is the show as it is or the show as you remember it, whether the episodes you return to are the episodes that exist or the episodes your memory has constructed. The dream version of Springfield is everyone's version of Springfield, not quite the show, but the show filtered through the experience of having watched it, the show as it exists in the space between the screen and the person watching. The floating timeline is not really about the impossibility of animated characters aging. It is about the human experience of returning to something from your past and finding it unchanged while you have changed around it. The episodes from 1993 do not age. You age. The gap between you and them grows wider every year, and the mystery of the show's frozen present becomes the mystery of your own changing past, the question of what it means to have a relationship with something that stays the same while you become different, and whether the version of you that first watched is still present in the version of you that is watching now. These are not questions the show answers. The show is not in the business of answers. It is in the business of returning the weekly invitation to come back to the house on Evergreen Terrace, to sit down on the couch, to watch whatever Homer is about to do next and laugh at it and feel, briefly, the particular comfort of the familiar. The comfort is real even when the familiarity is constructed. The warmth is real even when the situation is satirical. The love is real even when the character expressing it is a cartoon man with 4 fingers and an IQ of 55. And the mysteries are real even when the show will never solve them, because the mysteries are not in the show. The mysteries are in the relationship between the show and the people who have been watching it for 36 years, accumulating a personal history with a piece of fiction that is unlike any other personal history most of them will have with any piece of fiction, because no other piece of fiction has been present for this long, or invited this level of sustained, recurring engagement. You have been to Springfield before. You will go again. The house will be the same, the family will be the same, the cooling towers will be breathing their steam into whatever the weather is doing, and the river will be running. And somewhere in the water something will be moving that has one eye more than it should. And you will watch as you have always watched, with the particular quality of attention that the show produces, alert and relaxed at once, engaged and comfortable, present to the joke and also to the thing behind the joke, the thing that has been accumulating in the background of 36 seasons, the thing that the theories are trying to name. You know what it is. You have always known. You knew it the first time you watched, and you knew it every time you returned, and you know it now, at whatever hour it is where you are, in whatever state of wakefulness the night has brought you to. It is the thing that makes you come back. It is the thing that the loop sustains. It is the thing that Homer is dreaming about, in the hospital bed or on the couch or in the space between them where the show has always lived. It is the family. It is the house. It is Sunday night at 8 o'clock and the couch and the television and the sound of the theme beginning. It is Springfield. Wherever that is, it is home. Before the night fully releases you, there is one last thing worth sitting with. Not a theory, not a mystery, not a piece of evidence for any particular reading of what Springfield is or what has happened to the people who live inside it. Just an observation about what it means that the show is still here. 788 episodes, 36 seasons. Longer than most marriages, longer than most careers, longer than the entire lifespan of many of the technologies that have been used to watch it, from the cathode ray tubes of the early 1990s to the streaming services of the current decade. The Simpsons has outlasted the format that created it, the cultural moment that first received it, and several entire generations of the devices on which it has been watched. This persistence is not explained by quality alone, though the quality of the best seasons is genuinely exceptional, the kind of writing that rewards attention in the way that the best literature rewards attention, that reveals new things on the 10th viewing that it concealed on the first, that operates on multiple registers simultaneously and trusts the audience to meet it at whichever register they are capable of accessing. The persistence is explained by something beyond quality. It is explained by the show's relationship with time, specifically with the human experience of time passing and things remaining. We live in a world where most things change faster than we can track them. Technologies that did not exist a decade ago are now indispensable. Cultural references that were universal 5 years ago are already opaque. The landscape of entertainment, of media, of the ways people spend their attention has transformed beyond recognition several times within the show's lifespan. And through all of it, every Sunday, The Simpsons have been on the couch. That stability, the couch, the family, the house. The theme is the show's most significant gift to its audience. Not the jokes, as brilliant as many of them are. Not the satire, as sharp and accurate as it has been for most of its run. The gift is the stability, the assurance that something is still there, still the same, still recognizable in a world that offers very little that can be counted on to remain. Homer will be Homer. Marge will be Marge. Bart will be 10. Lisa will be 8. The loop will continue. And somewhere in the loop, somewhere in the accumulated weight of 36 seasons of returning to the same family in the same impossible town, there is a truth about what we need from stories, and what we need from home, and what we need from the particular comfort of the familiar that no amount of theoretical analysis can fully account for. We come back because we need to come back. We maintain the loop because we need the loop maintained. We keep Springfield frozen in its permanent present because the alternative, a Springfield that ages, that changes, that ends, is a Springfield that tells us something we are not ready to hear about the passage of time and the impermanence of the things we love. So the dream continues. The coma holds. The radiation keeps the biology stable. The collective agreement to not acknowledge what cannot be acknowledged keeps the social fabric intact. Burns keeps the lights on. Smithers keeps Burns alive. Homer keeps the plant running badly enough that nobody asks the questions that would shut it all down. And you keep watching, as you have always watched, because Springfield is still there, and the family is still on the couch, and the cooling towers are still breathing, and somewhere in the water, something with too many eyes is swimming through the contaminated dark. That is the show. That has always been the show. And tonight, as the last of the day's awareness dissolves into whatever the night brings, that is enough. More than enough. Good night.